welcome everyone in the room. I'm Laura McCracken, and I'm delighted today to be your Master of Ceremonies. Welcome to everyone who's here in the room at Digital Catapult, and also welcome to those of you who are online joining through the webinar. I think we have a couple hundred, don't we? So that's pretty exciting. So what is Platform Leaders? Just to put this a bit into context, Platform Leaders are a group of people who really appreciate the power of the platform economy. It could be people from marketplaces, social media, social commerce, super apps, and other platforms that are existence and part of this platform economy. We are bringing together people from different walks of life, some people who don't actually talk to each other on a regular basis. We're bringing together practitioners, business leaders, entrepreneurs, investors, and academics, policymakers, regulators, all to come together in a concerted effort to really unleash the power and the potential of the platform economy. It's an exciting time, and we have an amazing program with you for us today. So the program includes a lot of talks about current digital trends, AI investment. We'll be discussing some regulation within this exponential economy. We'll also be talking about some unique solutions about how you can bring together the platform economy and AI to solve problems with the healthcare crisis. So it's going to be an exciting day. And I also want to make it a bit more interactive. So if you could just go ahead and scan the QR code there, the Slido QR code. We're going to do a quick Slido quiz. Hopefully you all online are also able to log into Slido. Yes, I want to see why you're here. You know, are you launching a new platform, or are you with an existing business that's trying to scale up a platform? Are you an academic that's doing research? Are you an investor who wants to invest in this area? So there are so many different reasons why people might be in the room. Would love for you to just go ahead and log on, and we'll see what the results are shortly. Looks like we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are launching a new platform business. Yeah, so anyway, a nice diverse group. So welcome to all of you. And today we have the wonderful pleasure of having Digital Catapult, who is sponsoring us today. They've been gracious enough to give us their offices that are beautiful and beautiful views all around. So I'm excited to announce our first speaker of the day, Amanda Kamin. She is the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for Digital Catapult. She's had a wonderful career across 20 years where she's worked at Motorola, Visa, Vision Fund, and Food from Britain. She is an expert in corporate reputation management, financial inclusion, and microfinance. She's also worked on numerous boards and trust and charities. So please put your hands together and welcome Amanda Kamin.
Hi, everyone. So welcome to Digital Catapult. Can I just get a quick show of hands who's been here before? Anyone here been here before? Okay, that's not bad. That's pretty good. Right, well, welcome back, and welcome to everyone who's visiting us for the first time. My introduction was correct. So I'm Amanda Kamin, and I'm the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer here at Digital Catapult. So I look after 3 teams: marketing, communications, and events. But I've actually known Benoit and Laura for 15 years now, which is pretty amazing. So I met them when I was at Visa. They did some work for me when I was at Visa. They have done 2 bits of work for me here at Digital Catapult, and then they're helping with a third, which is our digital supply chain hub, which I know you're going to hear lots more about today, which is great. So I first want to thank Benoit and Laura for coming here to host your fantastic event, because it means a lot, actually, this long-standing relationship when I was at a different point in my career. And it's a real joy to be able to host you here today. And I fully support their expertise. So I know everyone's going to learn a lot here today, as I did in last year's platform event when we talked about Gen AI, regulation, and supporting scale-ups through innovation, which is something you're going to hear a bit more about now when I give you the background on Digital Catapult. And then I know after today's event, you're going to get some tours, you're going to be able to see our great facilities here, our different lab spaces. And I hope you enjoy that as well. And I hope you want to talk to us more after you see that. And also anyone online who won't physically get to experience those tours, the labs today, just feel free to reach out to me direct. If you're interested, we can set that up for you. Right, so I'm going to get into it. This is our ambition. We've recently updated our ambition and the areas we focus on. So we are about accelerating the practical application of deep tech to realize a better future. And I think what really sets Digital Catapult apart, and what again, I hope you really witness today, is that deep tech expertise and the ability to make it real. So I think there's lots of places you can get advice. There's lots of places you can experience theories. There's lots of places you can have a sort of intelligent academic discussion. Well, we've got that as well. We've got an eminent professor here, my colleague Rob Smith, who's going to talk to you on a panel later on. But the difference, I think, when you engage with Digital Catapult is you get experts rolling up their sleeves, experimenting with new technologies, and showing the difference it can make to businesses of different sizes and other aspects of UK life, really. And I think that ability to build an experiment in partnership is something that really sets us apart, and something we try to do through these wonderful facilities that we build and create that allow people to come together and make things real. So we are very pleased to be part of the Catapult network. There are 9 catapults across the UK, all set up by Innovate UK and the UK government. And really each catapult has an area of expertise where, again, they seek to support British businesses through lots of research and development work, technology and innovation. And what we do is we really put our expertise to use when we combine its powers by working together, also looking at the steer from UK government, and again, try to interpret that for business benefit for the UK or other societal benefit. So the areas we focus all of that effort in are 4. I mentioned one, which was enabling deep tech companies to scale. The second one, which you'll hear about lots with our Digital Supply Chain Hub project, which I've already mentioned a number of times, is improving UK supply chain resilience. We do that in a number of ways, some of which you'll find out about in our labs that you experience. We're looking at driving sustainability by driving industrial decarbonization. And lastly, that we advance UK development and use of data-enabled and open future networks. And again, when you think about supply chains, when you think about security, when you think about innovation, you'll actually see the convergence of some of these focus areas with each other that, again, you might experience in a hands-on way inside the labs. But we're really all about trying to drive impact to transition the UK to bring about real change for British businesses. And so looking back from 2018, which is when this measurement started, it's not a kind of random date, it's just when our figures add up in the most reliable way. We've worked with 3,000 companies to support them. We've driven £545 million of investment in that time and set up 20 of these facilities all around the country, including in Northern Ireland, where you can come and do that hands-on experimentation with our experts. Great, that was nice how that built and I didn't have to push the button again. So I mentioned a little bit about what sets us apart is that part of the UK Catapult network, being part of Innovate UK, having a connection to government, also working with academia, working at the heart of industry as well, and oftentimes trying to match industry with the new solutions and products from startups and scale-ups that are based here in the UK and driving investment from them. And I think that's another aspect that's unique to Digital Catapult is sitting in the middle of this ecosystem between these different players and trying to find solutions that overcome barriers and increase opportunity for each of those distinct audiences or groups, stakeholder groups. And we do that through a number of products that we offer, products or services, I suppose we should say. So whether that's bespoke software and data services, or platform engineering, or consultancy, or acceleration programs that we build where there's a particular focus. Tomorrow we've got our Black Founders event where, you know, less than half of 1% of the funding in this country was going to Black founded startups. We've done an amazing intervention for that, and tomorrow is the showcase event where we look at where that particular group has really made progress and we've driven investment. So we can do that to address particular business challenges or where we feel an intervention is required to break through a barrier holding back the market. And again, facilitating and convening like we're doing today. Today is probably a great example of us facilitating and convening experts together to talk about new solutions that link to deep tech that can drive change. Another fantastic slide coming up to demonstrate our uniqueness, and you'll probably be pleased to know I'm just going to focus on one of these aspects because I think I've mentioned the other ones, and that's our independence. So I think you know, having the connection to UK government and the funding that we receive from them through Innovate UK, we are able to provide the advice that we really feel is right. We don't have particular alliances to different providers. We really look at different stakeholders' problems and think how we can help them to drive through the barriers, increase productivity, find new solutions, open up new pathways for their businesses. And I think, you know, we're able to do that in a, we used to call it neutral way, but I think independent is how we like to describe it now. So I hope you'll see the possibilities in what you learn about us as you're here today. And I really hope you enjoy today's event with Benoit and Laura, and look forward to showing you all these facilities I've mentioned so many times after a bit of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Now, our next speaker is the co-founder and CEO of Launchworks. He helps organizations to harness the power of ecosystems and innovative platforms and business models. Before joining, or before creating Launchworks, he was the director of strategy, economics, and regulations at KPMG. He is a guest lecturer in numerous business schools around the world, and he's also the author, the co-author of Platform Strategy and Mission BlaBlaCar. So please put your hands together and welcome our next speaker, Benoit Reillier.
Thank you very much, Laura, for these kind words. Thank you, Amanda, for this great introduction. Good afternoon to you all. Nice to see so many friendly faces. I say good afternoon, but of course, good morning and good evening for those of you joining us online and who are sometimes in different time zones. I'm always amazed when I see all the countries that are represented. So we've got 20 minutes or so together, and I'm going to talk about the state of the platform economy. And I will start where we left off last year. So let me see if the clicker works. So last year, I presented this slide, and this is a great way to visualize, the way our economies have transformed over time. So if you go back in time and look at these companies in black, you'll see you've got, General Electric, the largest company in the world in 2001, for example, and this had been a large company for a long time. General Electric was a founding member of the Dow Jones in 1896, I believe. So, has been around for many years. And these companies, GE, CT, Walmart, all that, they manage huge value chains. And that was the main business model for many years, powering our economies. And this changes in 2016. You're familiar with these digital platforms. They're in green on the chart, and the famous GAFAMs. What do these guys do? Well, of course, they manufacture things, but at the heart of their business, they attract participants, match them, connect them, and enable them to transact. And that's a platform business model, and that's what marketplaces are all about. That's what social networks do. That's what you do when you run payment networks, and so on and so forth. So what has happened this year? What is changing? Well, these digital platforms are still there. They've grown a bit. I mean, if you've got good eyesight, you can see the valuations. We're now, above 3,000 billion, so 3 trillions of US dollars of market capitalization. So this is the market cap of the largest firms in the world. But there's a new kid on the block. There is NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is now the largest company in the world in terms of market capitalization. And it's 3.65 trillion, I think. Clearly, stock prices go up and down, and the sort of sequence may change. But this is a major change, and it's a rapid change. NVIDIA has been around for a while, but it has grown quite significantly over the past few years. And why is NVIDIA so big? Well, NVIDIA, as you know, many of you know, they're manufacturing effectively the chips that are at the heart of many AI applications. And all the other digital platforms are buying these chips in order to add AI capabilities to their products, to their services, and to their business model. So big shift, and we're going to talk a bit about that later as well. So stepping back again, last year I talked about a number of trends for 2024, so this year, and we talked about platform-powered ecosystems. So what is that? That's about the response of all these traditional business models to the platform disruption. So if you run shops, if you have a chain of shops in the UK or around the world, you can, of course, yourself use these innovations and add to your business model a platform capability. So if you run a DIY shop, maybe you can add content so that people can do DIY better. Maybe you can add products so that people have a long selection of references, so your stock is bigger than what you actually have in store. And so that's a marketplace, a product platform. And you can, of course, add a service platform so that you connect the people within your ecosystem that can help one another. So you can connect the electricians and the plumbers within your ecosystem with the people who need actually these skills and expertise for their work. So just an example. And that really has accelerated this year. We talked about B2B platforms last year, and clearly this is maybe less visible when you're focused on consumer platforms, because the brands are not consumer brands, so they're known within the verticals within which they operate. But this also is a big trend. And if you have to ship things globally, if you have to buy things wholesale as a business, etc., we see lots of platform activity in that world as well. Freight is now being managed with global platforms, etc. We talked about the circular economy, and in particular, we talked about platforms that allow you to reuse, refurbish various products and that are part of the circular economy. You even have platforms like Too Good To Go that help you not waste food. So really, every single vertical is impacted, and this has been really a theme this year as well. We talked about regulation, so it's easy to predict that there is more regulation, especially in Europe, but that was the case in 2024. For the first time, platforms are regulated. There are a number of regulations in Europe. I'm sure you've heard about the DMA or the DSA, the Digital Markets Act or Digital Services Act. There is even an AI Act, and there is new regulation in the UK. And there's a Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Act, the MCC, if you're looking for acronyms. Lots of new regulations in 2024, and this will carry on as we will discuss. And last year, we talked about new tech as well. And we talked about the fact that AI was going to become increasingly important. And boy, wasn't I disappointed. I mean, AI has been in everybody's, on everybody's lips for many months. And I was talking to some people arriving here, and I understand quite a few people are actually coming from AI meetings as well. So it's really increasingly important. So if we step back a little bit, we're really part of a new wave. And as you know, I was talking earlier on about the value chains of the Industrial Revolution. And we've been through that, through these developments. We've seen the previous waves. And now we are at the start of a new wave that is really going to be powered by AI. And this is very important. Why? Because if I overlay the economic growth impact of these waves on the chart, you see that really these innovations in technology and in business models are at the heart of economic growth. And you can see that the GDP per capita goes from less than 500, and it was flat for thousands of years before the Industrial Revolution, and it starts to increase at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and now it's going up, and we're going to be around 15,000 next year or at the end of this year. So I'm going to share with you some trends, some of the things that we think are interesting, are new, and are going to shape the digital platform markets going forward. It's always a difficult exercise, but we've selected a number of trends for 2025. So the first trend is what we call ecosystem competition. So there is clearly a shift from product to ecosystem. Before, you used to buy a product, it was a standalone purchase decision, and increasingly when you buy something, it's part of a larger set of market participants, and you see that when you buy a watch, or when you join a mobile, you buy a mobile and you join effectively an ecosystem, a platform with lots of market participants. This is very interesting because it means that at board level, increasingly, we talk about ecosystem strategy, and firms are asking themselves, which ecosystem am I a part of? Who else is in that ecosystem? What role should I be playing in that ecosystem? And it's not just a top-down thing, it's also a very organic thing where people decide that they share some values and staff moves from one company to another, etc. And they decide that they want to gravitate around some missions, some purpose. And ecosystems are broader, they're larger than firms, and therefore they're also able to accomplish much more and achieve big objectives. If you want to solve big problems for the world, an ecosystem strategy makes a lot of sense. So we think we'll see more of that in 2025, and how you orchestrate these ecosystems, what are the governance principles of these ecosystems, is going to be a very interesting topic going forward. So another trend that we think will start and continue in 2025, that we've selected, is digital twins. So digital twins, these are virtual models of a physical good or a process or a system, and they mimic the real world counterpart of that. So you can have digital twins of lots of things. It already works in lots of settings, but it's not widespread yet, but it's increasingly important. And we see that being applied at a macro level. So if you want to understand climate change, for example, it's very helpful now to create a digital twin of the Earth and understand how that model works and do simulations on that model. And you can also create digital twins at a country level. So increasingly we see central banks, for example, creating digital twins of all the households in the market, and they then test what happens when you increase exchange rates, for example. So it's called agent-based modeling in economics, and you can see, if certain areas, certain streets even, are going to be at risk of foreclosure under various, simulations and assumptions. So very powerful way of approaching these issues. You can create digital twins for your firm, for your company. Uber, for example, has got digital twins for its entire ecosystem, so it can do simulations about traffic conditions, about various business assumptions that it wants to test. And we can have digital twins for ourselves. And it's increasingly used in health. There's a health panel later on. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But you've got digital twins for yourselves, and digital twins for organs. In some cases, before surgery, a digital twin, for example, of your heart can be created so that you can actually test what may happen under various assumptions about the surgery, and the surgeon can actually test various procedures. So digital twins, we think 2025 will see the birth of many digital twins. The next trend we identified, we thought was very interesting, is what we call ultra personalization. And I remember writing this article with Laura, actually. It was more than 10 years ago now, and it was the title was something like The Segment of One, a Marketer's Dream. And it was really about how you can use information to create products that are really tailored to individuals. And we're getting there, but it's quite impressive the speed at which this is now happening. You can really get a diet that is tailor-made for you now based on your blood sugar response, etc. I mean, all the building blocks are there. It hasn't been scaled up and industrialized as a product, but it's really going to emerge, we believe, start to emerge next year. And you can do lots of things that are going to be individualized. In your everyday life, one of the main changes is going to be the way your personal assistants will become truly personalized. So your Alexa, your Amazon, your Google will now reply to you, but it will recognize your voice, and more importantly, it will hold information about you in its memory, its context window. So it will be able to contextualize the question you ask and become much more personal. So ultra personalization, we believe, is here to stay. There is even a service that can write a book for you. You can describe your taste, and it will what you're looking for, and it will write a book just for you. So you can see that we're going to the limit. And there is a service. I'm a great fan of Midjourney. So all these illustrations are made with Midjourney, which is an AI tool. But there is another great tool called Notebook LM. If you haven't tried that yet, I highly recommend it. It's a Google project, and basically you upload any content and you can interrogate, question this content, and it actually even creates a podcast just for you of the content you uploaded. So very personalized. Another trend we identified is what we call holistic sustainability, and we've seen that shift over the past few years. Many clients would ask us for help when they launch, say, a sustainable, circular economy platform, for example. And it used to be that you were either a sustainability project or not. And then now we're seeing that every project has got a bit of a sustainability angle, and we believe next year will be a tipping point. And now everybody with a project has really got to embed sustainability considerations into the project itself. So even if your platform is not really sustainable by itself, you have to ask yourself, what will be required from the ecosystem I'm going to operate in for my project to be sustainable? So we believe holistic sustainability will be a theme for next year. Another theme, and really this is something we talked about last year, but this is going to become increasingly important, is regulation. And every time there is a change, every time there is a shift in the waves, we talked about, there is new technology, there is innovation with technology, innovation with the business models themselves, you really have to rewrite the rules of the game. And regulation are important, and we're going to see a number of things in 2025. We're going to see the enforcement of the regulations of digital platforms that have been effectively voted and are enforced since March this year. But the first cases will probably happen next year. So we'll see how ecosystems that are maybe a bit closed, like Apple's ecosystem, fare in this new environment. And we're going to see new regulations as well, in particular in AI. And society will have to make big decisions about what what do we do with AI, and make sure that rules like the fact that you may want AI to actually says it is AI, so it's forbidden for us to impersonate other people, but at the moment there is no regulation preventing an AI from impersonating people in some ways. So we want to create some rules around that, but clearly there is a trade-off between innovation and regulation. So lots of thorny questions about where we place the cursor, how we can get both, and we get the regulations we need, and at the same time the innovation that is required. And clearly there's a panel that will discuss this as well. One thing that is going to be important, I think, as well in terms of regulations, is that we're going to see the impact of regulations in a tangible way on products. So some geographies, maybe in the US, and I'm not, making value judgments about whether it's right or wrong, but maybe in the US, some products will have capabilities that will not be available in Europe. And maybe in the UK, some products will be available that are not available in Europe, and maybe not available in the US. Or we are going to see diverging paths, or the tangible impact of some regulations. So this is going to be an interesting time. Another key trend we see is the increasing automation of some aspects of platform businesses. Not all of them, but some businesses. So clearly, platform has got more than one side. It has got two sides. It attracts participants from two sides. So you can think, of Uber as a platform with taxi drivers, and people want to be taken from A to B, passengers. And we've seen the shift from traditional, taxi markets, and in many cases, with monopoly provisions. The disruption brought about, and also, the choice and the growth in the market brought about by innovations and Uber and other market participants like Lyft and Bolt, etc. And now what we're seeing is that innovation, and in particular AI innovation, is enabling self-driving in that case. And it's slow. It will take years before it becomes ubiquitous, but increasingly you see business models being scaled, and you see the number of miles of cars that use self-driving really growing exponentially. So we think 2025 will be the beginning of that curve. Now, I took the example of self-driving cars, but we see that happening with lots of different platforms. So there is a big topic for platforms, what is the impact of AI for us? Many platforms are actually boosted by AI, but some platforms have got to watch out for the substitution. I mean, there is a platform of tutors, for example, so students on one side and people helping them with their exams and learning on the other side. And these platforms, many of them have unraveled in only a few months, because you can go straight to ChatGPT and ask the same question, and ChatGPT is actually pretty good at cogently articulating an answer for a student across most topics. And suddenly, these platforms have to think about how they add value in these ecosystems. So another thing to watch out for. So very briefly, I'll recap. So we talked about ecosystem competition for next year, digital twins, ultra personalization, new regulations, and automated platforms. So these are the main themes we picked out. And you may have noticed there is a theme going across all the themes, and that's really AI. And we think 2025 will see even more AI than we've seen in 2024. So much so, in fact, that we're launching something called collective intelligence for AI. And we've seen lots of people, lots of clients we've been talking to, interested in AI, not really sure where to start, not really sure where to scale, not really sure that their investments are justified, not sure they have got visibility over the kind of policies that will regulate the use of AI going forward. And we believe it makes a lot of sense to bring together that community and work together on these topics. So this is an announcement. This is not the launch today, but since I'm predicting what's going to happen in 2025, I'm predicting the launch of collective intelligence .ai, or for AI. And if you're interested, please do not hesitate to reach out if you want to get involved. I know I've spoken to some of you already and some corporates, etc. But lots going to happen on that front. That's it from me. Thank you very much. And I hand over back to Laura. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and that's a great segue into our next area, which we're going to be talking about AI. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, next panel. It's about AI, building robust, successful AI platforms. This speaker is the CIO. This speaker, she's the founder and editor-in-chief of The Innovator. She's an award-winning journalist for the last 40 years. She's been covering global tech and World Economic Forum for the last 20 years. She's worked at companies like Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, International Herald Tribune, Red Herring, and Business Week. So she's also been listed in the top most inspiring women with Forbes and Tech EU. So really excited to have her here leading this panel. Jennifer Schenker.
We're very lucky to have with us here today Dr. Rob Smith, to my immediate right, and Jakob Mökander. And just by way to put their comments into context, Rob has been working in AI for over 30 years, and he mostly in the aerospace industry, but also in other sectors. He has worked in academia, also as an entrepreneur, and he is the author of an AI book called Rage Against the Machine that deals with AI and discrimination. So welcome, Rob. And then we have Jakob, who also has an incredible AI background. He worked for the Swedish government stationed in both Delhi and Vienna. He did his PhD at Oxford in AI governance and ethics, and he has done work with AI audits with OpenAI and the pharmaceutical industry. And he spent 1 year at Princeton University in the US, also looking at technology and management of technology. And now his job at the Tony Blair Institute kind of brings all those dotted lines together. So welcome, Jakob, and let us jump right into our conversation. Rob, let me start with you. What are the key components of AI infrastructure at most firms today?
So some of these things are going to be familiar, some of them aren't. Certainly, we start off, I wouldn't call this a stack, I'd call it a chain. So you start off with the data handling and data storage aspects of infrastructure. Then you move into communications. Then you move into processing, particularly compute power, GPUs, TPUs, effectively high performance computing of various kinds. On top of that sits data handling frameworks first, because there's a great deal of data handling necessary for modern AI. Then you get AI frameworks, and then you get MLOps. Now I'll talk about MLOps last, but the thing about all those components up to the AI frameworks piece is effectively any data-intensive application would have the same components of infrastructure. It's not unusual infrastructure, it's usual infrastructure. When you get to the AI frameworks piece and then the MLOps piece, slightly different things happen. Now, in many ways, what's going on in AI today, a lot of the AI frameworks pieces have in fact been as commoditized as the rest of the stack. Effectively, there's innovation going on there, but there's lots of tools and components that people use over and over again, and there's providers that have good tools that they put in that space. Then finally, there's the MLOps space, and I want to tell you what that is, and then I'll make some comments about who the providers are. So in the MLOps space, what that really means, those of you who know what DevOps is effectively integrating the idea of continuous software development into the idea of operations, sometimes with feedback loops, like for instance, the A/B testing of features, right? That's what DevOps really is. Now, MLOps is slightly different. And the thing that makes it different is this, is when you've got models that are doing inferencing for you, sometimes they go wrong. And they can go wrong in a couple of ways. They can become stale. Effectively, the data sets on which they were trained can no longer be the right thing. Another way they can go wrong is you can have biases or error problems that you didn't anticipate that effectively you have to respond to. Now, what that requires is model retraining. So you get a loop that goes sort of back to the beginning of your whole data handling chain. So these are tools that you didn't need in the past in the DevOps world that you do need now in the MLOps world. Now let me talk a little bit about providers. The whole stack up to MLOps, everything before that, the big players, Microsoft, Amazon, it's the list that was on the previous slide in many ways, with maybe a couple of others, Oracle and a couple of others added in there. They own the space in many ways. The space of infrastructure provision and those kind of things is very much owned by very few companies. Now, the place where innovation, I think, is in the AI framework piece, there's innovation happening there for sure. But in many ways, the big platform players provide this commoditized infrastructure pretty well. The MLOps space, there's actually a lot of company-based innovation still going on there. That's not sorted yet, I'd say, and there's still a lot of innovation to be had about what companies are the key providers. I can name a couple that they're doing good stuff now, but I think that's a moving target still about how MLOps is provided for. So I hope that kind of begins to answer the question.
It does, thank you. And Jakob, I want to ask you to jump in, and I also realize that I did you a bit of a disservice because I failed to mention that you also have an engineering degree, and so you can go at this from both a technical and policy side.
Yes, but I think maybe to complement that great start, we looked at this from the company's perspective. I can say, so at the Tony Blair Institute, we work with governments around the world. So we think about the same part of the stacks, especially the first 4 layers that you mentioned, but what political leaders can do to put in place the necessary components that are needed for such innovation ecosystem to flourish. And for various reasons, this has become a harder and harder job in the past few years, not least due to the regulatory fragmentation that we're seeing in the space. So just to give some concrete example, the Tony Blair Institute, we are advising 40-odd governments around the world. Most of these are so-called non-aligned countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, Asian countries like Singapore and United Arab Emirates. And these countries sometimes face a challenge. How quickly do we move in digitalization? Do we, for example, digitalize our healthcare system with our digital health records to do all the innovation we can do when it comes to, for example, preventive and predictive healthcare? Similarly, when it comes to the center of government function and national security. And many of them are hesitating because to find the right layers of protection between national and digital sovereignty and the efficiencies that are needed at the application layer, it's hard to do in practice. And we're even seeing that people are politically abstaining from investing in this infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We are publishing a compute report that is coming out next Monday, where we have mapped with novel data the national compute access across 100 countries around the world. And just to give you a sense of proportion, if you exclude China, we could not find data from China for various reasons. US is out investing the rest of the world combined in data center investment. So not just the European Union versus US, but the rest of the world combined, including UK, Middle East, Asia, except China. We're also seeing a huge concentration in that, for example, if you look at where the shipments of the goes, the export controls are really making a difference, especially on the most advanced ships. So even if it's not in the US, it's in very controlled geographies that are with the key players that you mentioned, those that were on the list before. So why am I saying all this? It's like, in order to make the innovation ecosystem flourish, we need not just think of the technical stack, we also need to think about the geopolitical consideration around that. And what we believe are good policies that can facilitate this is things like mutual compatibility and interoperability of platforms and ecosystem. It's movement of people and capital, so the talents visas that we're talking about in the UK context, for example, to get the right engineers and developers in place where you need them. We're also seeing such regional clusters building of shared compute in parts of the world. One of the challenges that is going in that direction is many of the parts of the world have lack of compute access are also the part of the world where there might be regional conflicts. So the development of such shared compute clusters are even more challenging. But I think the key part just to say here is that for especially those parts of the stack that are generalizable and the same for all data-driven technologies, that is where we see governments should invest and also give that shared platform upon which entrepreneurs and developers such as you in the room can build.
So where do you see, how do you see government's role in ensuring that we have a fair playing field? Because we have a situation both in cloud and also with LLM models. With cloud, recently Google, who's one of the smaller players, filed a complaint with the EU against Microsoft, accusing them of increasing their prices by 400% for any company that wanted to move off of the Azure platform. And this came just a few months after they actually settled with an industry group representing European cloud providers. And Google obviously wasn't part of that settlement. So that's on the cloud side. On the LLM side, you know, there is a disproportionate representation by US companies, and there are sovereignty issues, you know, obviously in places like Europe. What can and should be done about that? And, you know, does Trump's election bring more kind of uncertainty into the mix?
Gosh, ask me the easy question, why don't you? So as I said previously, there is a dominance by a few players in the provision of infrastructure fundamentally. It's interesting to note that around large language models, and which implicitly involve that infrastructure, the Competitive Markets Authority here in the UK has issued a report. It's probably 5 or 6 months old now, where they express concern about the dominance of these few players in the market. And it is a concern. It's something that I think governments will have to act on. I think that if you look at past antitrust movements by governments. It's interesting, I found out this week that trust actually was a synonym for monopoly when the term antitrust was actually founded. So people thought as trust as monopoly fundamentally. So antitrust actually means anti-monopoly legislation. And you'll know that the Justice Department has had one case against Google now, and I think for ads. They're doing ad search, and they'll eventually do AI. So I do think there will be antitrust movements, and we'll have to see how that sorts out. There are other issues with regard to the dominance of a few players. The dominance of a few players means the dominance of fewer cultures, which is very important. And as Jakob was saying, interestingly, there are competing things here. There are leapfrog opportunities for countries outside of the U.S., etc. But there are also dominance problems. I'll mention this as an aside because I think it's something I'm very interested in. What the LLM revolution is founded upon is the capturing of semantics and how successful that has been, linguistic semantics. The impact on minority cultures and endangered languages is something I'm very interested in because there's a real opportunity there. But it depends on a lot of infrastructural things. So it could be that we have an opportunity to preserve the knowledge of cultures that might be lost if we don't allow the dominance of just a few cultures over the infrastructure.
Thanks, Rob. Jakob, do you want to add to that?
Yes, but there were quite a number of Tanya's to take this on. Let me actually follow up on two different strands. The first is the point you said about Google search. I'm sure many of you have noticed on your phone and on your browser that when you type in your normal Googling line, you first get the AI summary on the top. And this actually works in a fundamentally different way, right? Because before you had the linkages to the link, but it was up to the human to screen and assess the sources for trustworthiness and for recognizability. But the AI summary, what it does, it looks, what is the consensus we can find among the top sources? But the interesting part, there is an editorial function behind that, because you don't get up the answer for all questions. So for example, if I Google who won gold medal in rowing in 1994, I will get an answer because there is consensus among the sources. But if I ask something was the Russian medaling in the 2020 election significant? There will not be. And then the question is, when does these hyperparameters and those design choices that go in to determine the line between what is search and what is generative AI become an editorial decision? And that has legal implication. But this is something that will develop over time, and I think that Google is still doing experiments with how much to summarize with AI and for what kinds of queries. So that was one tangent. On the second one, on the regulatory implication also of the recent election in the US, I think there are, when we talk about AI governance, we have to keep in mind that these are in fact very many different fields. So for example, we're talking antitrust and competition law, we're talking product legislation. So the EU AI Act is fundamentally product legislation. If you look at the UK AI bill that has been announced from AI safety, that has to do with national security concern. And all of these things are important: competition law, product law, national security. But it might not necessarily be helpful to collapse them all into one lens and call it AI regulation. So personally, I'm a firm believer that we do need good regulation in the age of AI, and we need to rewrite and update the law so that they reflect the realities in each sector. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the solution to that will be very broad, horizontal, and heavy AI regulation. The final thing I should say here, just on this, to plant the mental image anyway. I don't know if you have read the recent book AI Snake Oil, come out by two professors at Princeton, by Professor Ivan Narayan, he's a computer scientist. He said, imagine a world in which we don't have a term for bicycle, cars, and spaceship, and we call everything vehicle. Then we have very uninformed debates where we're saying, are vehicles fast or slow? People disagree. Should we allow vehicles in inner cities? People disagree. And precisely that is the problem right now when we talk about AI regulation and governance. We're talking about vehicles when we need to be talking about spaceship, cars, and bikes in different contexts.
Yeah, that's very good. I have to pick up on the point about, oh gosh, I had a senior moment here. I'm going to let you go back. Sorry. Sorry. No, I know what it was. The subtlety of biases with regard to the AI summary. Thanks for giving me a moment for my senior memory to come back. So here's the thing. I want to explain to people that bias is very subtle. For instance, and without being controversial, on reporting on conflict between two nation states, summarizing what one nation state did versus what another nation state did in that conflict can be very subtle and carry extremely subtle biases, implying that one was more of an aggressor than the other. And I think that in various ways this has been seen forever. When a machine is doing that, it's very different from when a person is doing that. When I read a particular newspaper, I read The Guardian a lot, right? So when I read The Guardian, I know what The Guardian's biases are. I don't always agree with them, but I do know what they are, right? When I read Google's AI summaries, those biases are emergent phenomena for the most part. They're not Google's biases. They're biases that are so subtly embedded in complex, massive training data that they're not only intractable to me, they're intractable probably to everyone. And this is a real concern when that I feel like I have to say something about.
Okay, thanks for that. If we can, I'd love to take the conversation back into the realm of sovereignty and talk about where do we draw the line, but at the country level, but also at the company level, on what needs to be sourced locally and what can be sourced globally. I mean, if AI is going to be the key to everything, and I think everyone kind of agrees it will be, then what needs to be kept in-house?
Yeah, I think that Jacob's going to have the better comments on sovereignty given who he is and who I am, but I will say this. The power of large language models primarily drives from some very clever architecting and a great deal of computation, but also from the ubiquitous availability of data that didn't cost anything. But a lot of the power of that combination of compute and architecture applied to more focused domains can be really quite extraordinary. For instance, consider engineering design. If we had lots of engineering design data, huge amounts of it, in a field like aerospace, we could probably build now a large aerospace design model that could do very powerful things. However, the difference is the data is in proprietary silos, it's in sovereign silos. So the ability to realize the value of AI is limited by those factors. And there's a huge amount of work to be done between companies and between nations about how do we advance the power of AI through data sharing, and how do we develop technology that allows for effective data sharing, something we try to work on a bit here at DC.
I second all of those points, and I would especially say that there is sometimes a bit of a dichotomy between people who emphasize the benefit of AI and people who emphasize the risk, but really there is no use in looking away for the incredible benefit that can be had in particular sectors when they're well designed, as you said. We are of the opinion that you can only realize those benefits if you also have credible policies around things like national security, data privacy, upholding of human rights law and anti-discrimination and anti-competitive. So we basically view that as one enabler, just as we have the technical enablers, whether that is the data source or compute. When it comes to what countries can do, the first thing that I really liked about how the question was framed is what data sources and what can we source where, because this is really a matter of segmentation. Very few countries on this earth can afford to build the full stack internally, and that would also not be good. That would actually push us further down the line of a geopolitical fragmentation. If you think about the very logic around, let's say, the European Union as an example, was to integrate the core resources and dependencies, and that should be a good thing. Then we also need to be realistic and say full global integration at this stage is unlikely, and especially in the short to near future. So what we're working with government to do is to look at what are the different public services that they would like to digitalize or use AI and deliver, and what are the different risk levels and accountability and transparency measures that governments can live with. That will look very different if you are a small European country that is part of the European Union, or if you are, let's say, a country in the Middle East who is non-aligned and who have significant investment from both US and China. The most important thing is to create also local versions. So even though not everyone needs to, for example, develop their own large language model, a lot can be done by fine-tuning on local languages, on local data. For example, it would be a huge mistake to take healthcare algorithms trained in Europe or North America and apply them in sub-Saharan Africa or in the Middle East. And we know this. We mentioned bias before, but this is not an abstract concern. Even within the UK and the US, we have case studies where the same algorithm is 3 times less effective of identifying positive cases, for example, of skin cancer for people with darker skin. So this is just one example. So you both need to segment your use cases, then adopt the technology in the local context. And even so, there might be cases where you want to make some investment in local domestic infrastructure for the most critical cases. And this analogy might not go all the way, but think about, for example, the defense industry. The defense industry has historically been a bit of a protected supply chain so that governments can maintain sovereignty even in case of conflict and escalation. And there will be parts of the digital stack that should be considered at the same level of priority as the defense industry. But that does by no means make this a binary choice for countries to, let's say, shall we import or build a global, should we go cloud or on-prem? There will be a plurality of approaches needed for most countries.
Thanks. So let me turn to you, Rob, to talk about the same this topic, but at the company level. So what role do you see open source playing? Because this is a way that companies can perhaps not be tied to completely to the large LLM providers from the United States, but also help them potentially meet cost and sustainability goals by allowing them the freedom to use small language models when LLMs are not necessary, etc. What's your take on that?
It's interesting that I think last week, or maybe it's a couple of weeks ago, the Open Source Institute came out with their definition of what open AI actually is. And it's strong and useful, but has maybe one problem.
Is Meta happy?
I don't. Meta's happy. I think I think Meta comes out okay on it. But the thing is the controversial bit. So the non-controversial bits was OpenAI means, first of all, open architecture. So what's the architecture of this model? How are the layers built? How does it connect together? A lot of programmer geek stuff. Second is open weights, the idea of the parameters, these billions of parameters we hear about, making those open. That's another definitional aspect of OpenAI. The last one was the controversial one, was open training data. In order to basically say it's OpenAI, do you need to say, and here's where we got all the training data? In the end, they sort of fudged it. It basically says a technically competent person should be able to recreate the system from scratch for it to be open, which sort of fudges the idea of whether the data should be open or not. Open AI, as it's defined now, is critically important to basically the advancement of AI for lots of objectives, for fairness, for things like sustainability, for ubiquitous use, all those kind of things. However, this data issue is going to continue to nag us, and it brings us back around to the idea of companies is the issues of propriety and data ownership are implicit in the way AI is working today. We're trying to work with technologies here about trying to maintain people's data sovereignty and ownership, and helping companies basically be able to share data without sharing things that are private. But those things are still things that are in process. This challenge of, if I can digress for just a moment because it's such a good anecdote, is if you go to Midjourney, I believe it is Midjourney, and you ask it to draw Mario, it will tell you it can't because it's a copyrighted character. If you ask it to draw a cartoon plumber, it draws Mario. Reliably. And this is true across all the AI models. You can get ChatGPT, or recently you can get it to generate New York Times articles almost word for word. So this issue of ownership of data goes down to the company level, it goes down to the individual level. It is a key challenge within the generative AI of today that we have not yet solved, and it is a key research issue. It's also a key issue about investment and hesitancy to invest and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what I fully agree with is that we haven't solved the data problem. And in the UK, there will also be a review of data privacy law, especially as it relates to intellectual property and the training of large language models. But I think one thing we should keep in mind, without coming to a sort of premature conclusion, is when we talk about updating regulation in the age of AI, that can cut both ways. That doesn't always mean stricter laws or upholding existing laws. Sometimes digital ecosystem work differently than physical one. We can have resources that are mutually shareable and are non-rivalrous goods and so on that did not work in the physical space. But that was an aside. I also, if I can just follow up a bit on the LLM point, of course, large language model and generative AI has been many ways helpful to get political leaders and business executives' mind to think about what investments are needed in the stack. At the same time, I would caution both companies and governments to over-index on current model. This particular computational technique did not exist 3 or 4 years back, and in just 3 or 4 years, we might have new kinds of computational techniques, whether they are hybrid system, multimodal, neurosymbolic system. And I think the key point here is to really, insofar as we're making long-term investment, stick as much as possible to the first 4 or 5 layers in that hierarchy that you outlined in the beginning to create a generative ecosystem and avoid actually locking ourselves in. And the point I'm making here is that this goes both for positive investments in what we want to use technology for, but it also goes for regulation. I would really caution any government about making narrow regulation targeting LLMs to generative AI unless they're dynamic enough to follow the trajectory we're seeing in new types of architectures and algorithms.
I have to comment one thing there is a very good shift between EU AI Act version 1 and version 2 was that in version 1 the definition of AI was basically so extraordinarily broad that it covered all of computing, and it was about tech. It was a tech definition. It shifted in the second version to an intention definition. Does it intend to substitute for some human decision-making activity? Is the definitional aspect. And that was key. So that allows for the flexibility Jacob's talking about. We've got to be careful about definitions because if we tie it to a particular kind of technology, it's missing the legal and regulatory point. And the EU did make, I was so pleased when the second version came out because it made this move. And all the regulatory efforts need to think about what they mean very clearly in that way.
Thanks. So let me ask as a follow-on question, Rob. You were saying that for regulation, it's important. The definition now is more geared towards, is the intention to replace a human function, and I think that's kind of a good segue into the next question, which is, how do you see corporates building AI into their workflows?
Yeah, I think it was very interesting. I was saying to Jennifer before this talk, I saw a paper presented yesterday that where someone studied two kinds of AI users, one that they called centaurs and one that they called cyborgs, just as labels. So centaurs in their workflows basically took every aspect of a task that was broken down into a series of tasks and treated each of them with generative AI. They used generative AI all the way everywhere. Cyborgs basically focused the use of generative AI on particular parts of the workflow. And by a narrow but statistically meaningful margin, the cyborgs win. So effectively, the human decision making about where to use the AI was a part of what's good. And I really believe deeply that what we have now is a tool to help us distinguish between when does a machine do this best and when does a human do this best, and make those workflows work. And I think the companies that will succeed and the providers will succeed are the companies that make good decisions about that. Where does it fit the human workflow and enhance the human workflow, not trying to substitute for the entirety of the human workflow, which generally is going to lead to more problems and is not going to get the synergies that are really needed to yield value.
You want to add to that, Jay?
Yes, definitely. So this is an area that we have done a lot of work on at the Tony Blair Institute. And the first thing I should say before I rabble any statistic is any of these statistics that are projections of the future should be taken with a big grain of salt. And they're probably all wrong, but they can give us a sense of proportion. So if you start with the efficiency increase themselves, we're often thinking now of using AI for productivity gain through, for example, generative AI and LLMs and to create documents and text. But even McKinsey, who've been one of the consultancies who have been driving this narrative, in their own report about the potential about generative AI, what they're saying is this will add 30% to the expected productivity increase we would achieve from automation and AI anyway, with or without generative AI. Mm-hmm. So that still shows that 2/3 is still in machine learning optimization, automated decision making, process management, and all that other stuff also. So even when we say we should use AI to make public service more efficient or to make a company more efficient, generative AI will have some part of that, but there's other computational techniques that are equally or even more important. So that was point number one. Point number two, if we zoom in on generative AI specifically, I don't know how much you are using it in your everyday life. I try sometimes. Sometimes it helps me, sometimes it obscures what I'm trying to do. And what I find is you can use generative AI as an inverted test if you actually know a topic. Because Gen AI helps me a lot when I don't know anything. And if I actually know something about the topic, I find the text that comes out quite unhelpful. But what that shows us is this. To use it as a search engine or to generate this is perhaps a limited use case. What I use it for instead is I write the points that I want to say, and then it helps me improve my paragraphs, my prose, it helps shorten it. And generative AI is a much better writer than I am. And our combination in me bringing the insights and the fact, and helps me craft the messages for different target audiences, can be an incredibly powerful way, especially if we want to create, let's say, multiple products for different audiences, whether that is journalists or political leaders or the public. So I just wanted to make those two comments.
Yeah, great points. That AI definitely can augment humans in the workplace, but I think it'd be interesting to also add in here a word about AI agents, which Gartner is predicting to be the big thing in 2025. They're already being used in call centers and a number of functions, but we're now seeing their use beyond, and we're seeing groups of AI agents orchestrating and working together. And I recently came across an interesting case involving a small insurance company in Europe where they had an entire department nabbed by a competitor, and so they had to kind of run it with chewing gum and string for a couple of months, but during those 3 months, they had a AI expert basically build agents to replace the entire team. Now, insurance is, a special market because a lot of these things can be mathematically, done. But what was interesting here is that the team actually outperformed, did twice as well as the human team did. But that was actually a problem because insurance is a regulated industry, and the agents, were able to get so granular that they could predict very well who would be a risk and rejected too many people. And so the lesson for them was that they had to program the agents to behave, within certain guidelines. So I think that's also something interesting for corporates to think about.
Yeah, and it's actually resonates with what Jacob's saying is the old AI is still there, right? The old AI is still there, and in many ways that's what agentic AI is. It's the old AI creeping back in. So what you're really doing is writing fragments of code that do process automation, right? Sometimes in parallel. If you do process automation in parallel, you call it a multi-agent system, right? The agents are working together in some way. That agentic AI is effectively the old AI coming back in, which is great, right? And it's interesting what you said about insurance in this particular application is, I was saying earlier that there are jobs, processes that in companies run at a certain cadence and in a certain way. When you convert them to automated cadences, they can run faster quite often. But what you discover is that the process automation may have overlooked criteria and steps that you didn't realize you were actually doing implicitly in the slower model. And because of that, this is calling back to ML ops in a bigger way, is that you have to adjust your operations to cope with the idea of ML, right? Because sometimes you can think that you do a bunch of, everybody knows this who works in a real company, I think. You can do process automation and think that it's done that way, but the people who really do it know it's done that way, and then very often you're pausing and saying, okay, this is an exception case. You've got to allow for that in the workflow. And as I was saying earlier, this idea of integration into workflows is absolutely key.
So another aspect that we haven't talked about yet about AI infrastructure is connected to sustainability. And, there's not a corporate in the world now that is not under pressure to, become greener. And adopting AI, and particularly large language models, is going in the opposite direction. And one of the big issues here is that the providers of these large language models are not very transparent about how much energy, their emissions, how much water they use, and they also measure things differently. There's a lack of standardization on the measurement and also on, the responsibility to report. So how do we fix that?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually take it ahead and be a bit optimistic. I think that we should be aware of that artificial intelligence and computation in general do consume large amounts of energy, and we see this increasing. Just as a benchmark, what we saw in our compute report is in many industrial countries right now, data centers take up roughly 1% of national energy demand. In some countries like Ireland, that is way higher due to the nature of the economy with a lot of also servers. Same in Scandinavia where we have cooling. But my main point is this. Artificial intelligence will on the long term be a net positive for our ability to address climate change, because the energy that goes into this can also be helped to optimize other processes, to solve problem computationally that we otherwise would have struggled with, to find synergies in planning, and also to do a lot of processes that physically would have taken material resources to do and to solve them in a computational realm. And one thing I sometimes do when I think about what are the challenges with artificial intelligence, I divide them into two broad buckets. One is a bucket where technology can play a role in solving, and the other bucket is challenges that will only grow larger the more we centralize and optimize with the risk of technology. And let me say what I mean with that. The energy problem is real, but there are different ways of generating technologies, whether that's renewable, whether that is nuclear, and we will be able to continue to improving on that, whether that takes a decade or two. But if you take other challenges like for example, power concentration in networks or surveillance that come from optimization of data points, these are other challenges with democracy and legitimacy that will only intensify the more technological progress drives us in the direction of artificial intelligence and optimization. So I'm saying is that the energy transition is important and the problems with that are real, but I think compared to the challenges we're facing with power concentration and transparency and democratic legitimacy and control of the system, then I would be less worried about our ability to address that.
So we've got, I mean, the message here is we've got to get the balance right? And so we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask you both, like, in 60 seconds to just sum up what you want the audience to take away as your key takeaways.
What to take away is that AI is bigger than just generative AI. I think that's Jakob said that, and I actually agree with that. That the large language model, although an incredible breakthrough that's going to influence us all, is domain-specific models are going to be very important and more complicated to get to come into existence because of various factors, but possibly much more powerful ultimately. And finally, that the integration into human workflows, what does the human do, what does the computer do, and how do we get those to synergize, is the most important pressing research problem and value opportunity.
Jakob, you have the last word.
Yes. In terms of how to think about this transition that is currently ongoing, I think it's back to basis and work with the end in mind, because the more artificial intelligence is underpinning everything we do, the less will it also be a unique selling point to emphasize the role of AI in that. So the question is really, how are we improving on a certain process in, for example, healthcare or drug discovery, or in how we ensure transparency in democratic processes? And AI is one component that goes into that, but it doesn't exhaust it. I often think around AI in the simplest term as one way to represent and solve problems in the computational realm, but the problem is very seldom at the computational realm. That is a translation. So how good is our model of the real world problem we're trying to solve with a mathematical model, and what kind of feedback loop are we getting in from the validation of the mathematical output into the effects of its real world? So you can think of it almost like a transformation between real world problem up to a model and down to verification. So I would say start with what is a real world problem and build in those feedback loop to see if we're actually improving on the status quo. Then it matters less whether we call that up there AI or something else.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. Please give a big hand to our panelists.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you guys for raising such important questions on things like intellectual property, antitrust, privacy, subtle bias. If only we had a lawyer in the room who could help us work through some of these questions. And luckily we do. So our next speaker, panel leader, is a partner at Linklaters. She is a specialist in antitrust and foreign investment. She has over a decade in competition law in the UK and EU, and has worked on the Competition and Markets Authority. So please welcome Verity Egerton Doyle. Hi.
I'll leave it over to you. Hi everyone, and I'll welcome the two panelists up now and then introduce them. We're going to speak about regulation in exponential age, which I think is a great topic, and we have two brilliant speakers here to join me. So we have first Matthew Brauvac. Matthew is a director at the Digital Markets Unit, which is the not so new branch of the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, which is focused on digital markets, has been operating in shadow form for about 3 years now. and is very shortly, around the turn of the year, about to take on a whole swathe of new statutory powers to administer the UK's new regime for the largest tech companies, the strategic market status regime. And Matthew has a background as a competition and regulatory lawyer in telecoms, having been at Sky. I think you were at Vodafone before that, right, Matthew? So he has a broad range of experience that he brings to the role. Then just to my right, we have Ollie Bethel, who leads the competition team at Google for EMEA. Ollie has been at Google since 2008, and so has seen, I think we're going to kind of frame the panel. I'm going to step back in a moment and give you a bit of a framing for kind of how did we get to where we are, and I think it's great to have Ollie here because he's been at Google and kind of seen this whole evolution of the way that we've thought about regulating digital platforms, and in particular, the market power of digital platforms. So welcome. So we have about 40 minutes and we want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I think we'll probably each, I'll do a bit of scene setting, then I'll let Ollie and Matthew speak for a bit. We'll have a bit of a discussion, and then please do be ready to ask questions when we come to the end, and we'll make sure we leave time for that. But I mean, just to set the scene. So the von der Leyen Commission, the European Commission that is, just come to an end, but of course she's coming into her second term, which started about 4 years ago, introduced a whole swathe of new legislation relating to the digital sector. We're talking about around 20 new legislative instruments, and that's just the EU. If we go, outside the EU, in the UK has introduced a whole range of new legislation. The two most prominent pieces being the Online Safety Act, which passed Parliament last September, and the Digital Markets, Competition and Consumers Act, which passed Parliament in May this year. We see the same thing all around the world. And this kind of complete tidal wave of regulation which has come in to address a range of perceived ills in the digital sector has really, just completely exploded over the last 5 years. And so how did we get here? And all of us here on this panel today are really people who focus on competition. And so I'll focus on the pieces of regulation that relate to market power and control of the most powerful tech companies, the most powerful platforms. But if we step back a bit, I think in our world, in our antitrust world, recognising that while live and breathe, it is a bit niche for most people. I think we started off, and Ollie, it'd be great to hear your observations on this. If we roll back kind of 10, 15 years, really the approach of competition authorities was, I think that the old adage was competition is just a click away. So when you think about digital markets, you think about online, and the example that was always given was MySpace. Everyone remember MySpace, or maybe you don't remember MySpace, but MySpace had such a leading position, and then competition was a click away. Facebook came, MySpace, young people today haven't even heard of it. And that was kind of really the mantra, I think, of competition authorities around the world for many years. And that led to a relatively hands-off approach. There are, of course, really, there are a number of big cases that are the exceptions to that rule. Of course, the very old Microsoft cases, there were some Google cases last decade, but they were kind of the exceptions to the rule. In general, competition authorities were not doing a lot of intervention in digital markets, and in particular in the merger control space. A lot of acquisitions took place. And I think then, it's probably starting about now 10 years ago, but really with a lot of momentum from about 7 or 8 years ago, that there came a growing consensus that actually, hold on, what was the next Facebook that came to replace MySpace? And actually, now that we're looking at these digital platforms, a lot of them have had their market power for really quite a long time and have expanded that out into other areas. Of course, delivering new products and new services, often for free, to the citizens of the world. And so I think it was, around that time, around 10 or so years ago, but really with a lot of momentum in the 5 years after that, there was a real shift from competition authorities that started to think, actually, hold on, have we been, and I think there were allegations that perhaps they'd been asleep at the wheel. You know, it's the role of competition authorities to stop, you know, the accumulation and abuse of market power. And there was a concern that perhaps competition authorities had not done that. They hadn't been doing their job. And I think that led us into where I think we've been living for the last few years, which was really what I would like to call the age of remorse, where you then saw competition authorities coming and really using the full suite of their powers very aggressively against large technology companies. And at the same time, there's a debate around were the existing tools enough? And I think a consensus was reached certainly among authorities and among legislators, that we did need some new tools, because actually these markets have different characteristics. Key among them, they're very, very fast moving. So one of the criticisms of antitrust is you have these cases that run on for 10 years, and you might be trying to protect startups who, by the time the case finishes, they're dead. And so there was a consensus that we needed new tools, and that's kind of the context in which we have all this new regulation. And, you know, the key pieces being on the EU front, the Digital Markets Act, in the UK, the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act. And when just now at a really exciting moment, I think, in the evolution of platform regulation, in that it was only in March of this year that the obligations in the Digital Markets Act started to apply. So we now have kind of coming up to about 9 months. We're kind of coming to the end of the first year of the Digital Markets Act being fully in force. The UK's legislation is coming into force in, I think, December, January. And so we're now, having spoken about it for many, many years, I think we're now kind of on the edge of a new era of regulation of market power in platform markets. But of course, at the same time, you know, we've been having this debate, and of course, technology, as we've been hearing, has moved on so rapidly. And so, you know, it's kind of crazy to think that the Digital Markets Act, and we'll come in and talk about some of the differences between the different legislation and what that might mean for how fit they are for the future. But the Digital Markets Act, the text was settled at a time, you know, before people were even really talking about large language models as something that was going to be widely available. And so then you have this problem where we've just got this shiny new, you know, legislation, but then we start to ask the questions, is this fit for the future? Can this actually keep up with the fast pace of change? And so that's kind of that's where we are in our world, in the kind of antitrust and digital regulation world. And I want to come to Ollie first, because Ollie, you've been at Google a long time. You've seen this whole evolution from, you know, some of those exceptions to the rule, early cases that I mentioned, right through to now, where, you know, are we on the verge of, you know, big tech companies becoming regulated, just like, you know, telecoms or other forms of infrastructure? Ollie, what can you tell us about the journey you've been on and the moment you think we're in now?
That's a big question. Thank you for having me. Where to start? So I suppose that there are different types of remorse. You talk about an age of remorse leading to the formation of these new rules, and there are plenty of them for sure. But there's also another kind of remorse, which is that we have the new tools and we don't quite know whether they're fit for purpose or whether they're going to do what we hope that they would do. So I'd say that where we are now in the journey, from Google's perspective, is, you know, I think some cautious optimism that these things are going to work and that there is a way to launch regulated products in a more scrutinized environment. There's certainly an acceptance at the company. And again, I can only speak for Google, but I think this applies across plenty of the gatekeepers, that with extensive reach, global reach, often across a portfolio of consumer-facing products, this kind of scrutiny, this kind of legislation was coming. The cases were taking a long time for a variety of reasons, but were taking a long time to work their way through the courts. You're not seeing very many of them. And that we would arrive at a destination where a regulator would expect to be, you know, just as we present ourselves as wanting to be as nimble and innovative and fast-moving as the market demands, so too the regulator would want to be in that position. So I think there was for a long time a sense that we were moving in that direction. A lot has come all at once. I was previously EMEA, I'm now actually global, so I look across. No, it's fine, don't worry. The old days were simpler, you know. And I think when you look across the global portfolio of work that my team is currently working on, all of these regulations are sort of moving in similar directions, but with some important differences in how they think about regulating technology companies. And at the same time, the narrow field in which I work, which is competition or antitrust, very much bleeds into other areas of regulatory interest. There is no, the blurring of 10 years ago is now sort of fully in effect. So privacy issues intersect with copyright issues, intersect with competition issues, sometimes at precisely the same moment. So there is a huge amount of complexity in the environment in which we find ourselves. As we look ahead, is that sort of the past, if you like, the getting through remorse and looking forward with a sense of sort of hope and optimism for how it can work, there are some aspects of this that we pay particular attention to at the moment. And I suppose you could sort of distinguish those between procedural areas where we have sort of hope and optimism, and then substantive areas. And when we talk about the procedural side of things, it was very interesting to me in those final remarks to hear something that I often hear within Google, within Alphabet, which is on the sort of the need for regulation to maintain enough flexibility, adaptability to function properly in the environment in which we're operating as we launch products. It's very much something we hear within the company from our engineering colleagues. However, at the same time, we're often asked for clarity and certainty. So there's a real tension there as regulators, and you see different approaches being taken internationally. We've talked a little bit about the DMU. Matthew's going to talk about the legislation in the UK. Do I codify a piece of legislation based on the products, the attributes, the launches that I'm seeing currently in the market? Do I define a search engine? Do I define a virtual assistant? Do I define a social network? Or do I try and build some adaptability into the system? And at the same time, I have people asking me for predictability. So it's an area where we pay a lot of attention. We hope for sort of some balancing between the two. You don't want to be caught by surprise with a piece of legislation that no one was prepared for, but at the same time, you want the regulator and the rules that they're applying to be adaptable enough to accommodate the products that you're launching. Proportionality, you'll often hear lawyers like me talking about that notion, but to be more specific, another thing that we look for now in this new regulated environment is a very clear sense of what the regulator's goals are and how we're going to be measured against those goals as kind of getting closer to a state of compliance that's satisfactory. I think sometimes, you know, some of the notions that we talk about, perhaps not here so much, but in the sort of the small bubble of competition, you talk about notions of improving competition, of improving choice, but the fact is that manifests in product features and having a sense of what we are driving towards. There is a big difference, for example, to telling a search engine that it's important to promote choice, to give consumers an understanding of what's available and to allow them to make an informed decision, and mandating that traffic ought to go to particular websites. There's a big difference for us. Those things are both measurable. Which is it that we shoot for? So I think having some sense of where we're shooting for in the new framework is something that's also very important for us within Google. A little just perhaps on the sort of the substance of, in this age of hope, the substance of what we sort of hope to see. It may sound trite, but one of the things that we're often talking about within the company is, well, how does the regulator sort of pick the things in this dynamic, complicated, I mean, in the last hour, the changes that will be happening to Gemini will have been significant and multitudinous. In that environment, how are we choosing, and how is the regulator choosing the areas where we ought to focus? What really matters? You know, we see, you know, I watch with interest as the CMA hits some issues that people care a lot about. You know, we talk about baby formula, we talk about dynamic pricing this morning, the Oasis tickets issue. You see the Competition Markets Authority really focusing on issues that consumers care about. How does that translate to our environment? How do we think about the areas where it's going to be really, really important, and both we and the authority will invest time and effort to understand the technology and ensure that we've created a good, noticeable, relevant outcome for consumers? That's very important. Second, how do we avoid going over old ground? As I say, a lot of these new pieces of legislation are truly international. I have regulators looking at ad tech in the US, in France, the European Commission, India, Korea. Everyone is looking at all of these issues. So there is a question, I think, for us and for the regulator as to, well, okay, at what point do we sort of choose to move forward in a new area? Are we going to all be looking at the same issues in parallel for a long period of time, or are we going to have some regulators who are sort of pushing ahead in new areas, and what would ought those new areas to be? So that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're sort of thinking about within the company. To end on a sort of perhaps a sort of somewhat less optimistic note, I think there is a bit of a risk, particularly in Europe at the moment, as we see some of these intersecting pieces of legislation and the complexity. You know, the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, is 22 rules. We have 8 core platform services that have to comply with those 22 rules, and we're just one gatekeeper. When you look at the nature of those rules and regulations that you must comply with, an easy default in the short term is not to launch. And I think that's something that people should be aware of, right? It's not born of any desire to make great pronouncements about a desire to sort of pull back launches to make an impression. It's just a fact of resource allocation within the company. And that is something that we see increasingly, I think, in certain areas. I think we're in my segue to Matthew, we're optimistic that the UK's framework gives you more space, more ability to be nimble and adaptable and to sort of take a somewhat simpler approach. But it is one of those substantive risks that we see out there ahead of us in the European Union.
Matthew, response, or could you give us a bit of, I mean, in particular on this last point around, I think many people here, we saw in the survey at the beginning, are looking at bringing, new technologies to market, and obviously not everyone is Google or another large platform, but this question of how do you ensure that, as we move to more of a regulated kind of environment, including for the largest tech companies who are obviously key counterparts to people looking to launch new products, how do we ensure that in the UK, from your perspective, customers are still and citizens are still getting access to kind of new technologies, and how can we do that in a way that kind of protects competition and contestability and over the longer term, but at the same time doesn't leave us behind? Small job.
Yeah, thanks for that. So thanks very much. Very glad to be here. Thanks also to Ollie for giving us a sense of perspective in your comments. Ollie, I can tell you that as important as the issues are that we're talking about today, the UK public cares about their pets far more than any of these issues. We've had more responses to our current inquiry into vet services than kind of all of the other inquiries that we've got going on combined. So worth keeping in mind. Look, I think a couple of things. I would say it's important we start from a pro-digital markets, pro-platform businesses standpoint, and it's worth sort of saying that always up front. We've got 3 lawyers on the stage here. When I was a lawyer in private practice many years ago, what a partner said to me, we train lawyers like we would train doctors if we ever only showed them corpses, because basically lawyers learn by case law of things going wrong. You pretty much do all of your work on things that go wrong. And I guess the same is true of regulators, right? Regulators tend to think about the risks first and the benefits second. And I think we need to be balanced about that. So we start from a position, digital markets have brought amazing benefits to consumers, to business, to the economy. The UK economy is a highly digital economy, probably the 3rd largest digital economy in the world. And we have got amazing innovation here in the UK. So, it's kind of worth sort of starting with that. For those who haven't necessarily been following every bit of the legislative proposals that have been running, as Verity says, for some time here in the UK, we are just about to launch with the new powers that we've got to regulate digital markets, and they are similar to the EU Digital Markets Act in their sort of overall, high-level purposes. But they're quite different in a couple of sort of key points, which I just want to quickly touch on. One is the Digital Markets Act, the rules are there codified actually in the legislation, and also a lot of the thresholds in order to kind of know whether you're in or out are also codified. So it gives quite a bit of legal certainty, But as Ollie said, it doesn't give you a lot of flexibility or a lot of nimbleness. Now, in the UK environment, we're going to go the other way on that. We're more flexible, but recognize that that means that you can't be quite as categoric about exactly what applies and exactly when. So we will be in a position to apply the new rules. There are some thresholds which show that it really should only apply to the very largest companies. You have to have really quite significant turnover in the UK or globally in order to apply. And then, frankly, for reasons of resource, I can reassure people around the room that we really are just looking at the very largest tech companies that have got, as Verity mentioned, strategic market status, a position of strategic significance. There are some sort of qualitative tests that we need to go through there, and then most importantly, nothing happens automatically. We have to start the process by actually putting out an analysis and run a 9-month process of actually analyzing the market power. We analyze market power, we give an opportunity for gatekeepers, other stakeholders, lots of people to comment. That'll be a very transparent and open process, and it'll be evidence-led and evidence-based. And then, to Ollie's point, we also have the advantage that we will set out in that process what are the purposes for which we think we're intervening. Is it to increase choice? Are we trying to improve competition in the core product itself that we've got? Or are we mainly trying to prevent leveraging from that market power into adjacent markets? Or are we trying to intervene in order to mitigate the effects of that market power directly on consumers and businesses today? And it may well be a mixture of those things, but it is an obligation on us to set that out clearly. And then when we look at the interventions that we're going to do, we have to decide, are they going to be effective as against that purpose that we've set? And then, are they proportionate? And that test will be set out. So we do have one advantage that kind of unlike the Digital Markets Act, we don't have to have a single answer to Ollie's question. We can have different answers for different digital markets and different sectors. And I think that that's probably right, because actually we, to the comment of the previous speakers about, using the term vehicle to mean 3 different things. Actually, the term digital markets actually encompasses really some quite different sectors that have got really quite different dynamics. And some companies are challengers in one and incumbents in others. And, that is going to be part of the interest going forward. So the final thing I'd like to say is, I completely agree with Verity. It's a really interesting time. It's an interesting time because it's also going to be a time of a natural experiment. We're going to see how the Digital Markets Act applies. We're going to see how antitrust enforcement, which is typically the way that the US is leading things, applies. And we're going to see how the DMCC Act in the UK applies. And I absolutely agree. We're going to have to keep good records of, the kind of KPIs and the outturns that we get from those different approaches. And frankly, if we see good results in some places, we will adapt in order to, benefit from that learning. And that is absolutely part of the approach that we're taking and the way that we're thinking about it. Final point is, it's really important, the people have commented about how fast-moving these markets are, how technologically complex they are. We absolutely recognize that challenge. CMA was one of the first sort of authorities out there to really invest in data science, in data teams. We've now got about 80 people in our data unit with technologists, that sort of background. We're never going to become a Google, but that's fine because, that's not our job. But we have got that expertise, and I think we'll continue to develop it. Similarly, in our digital markets unit, we're now up to about 75 people, working and thinking very hard about these issues, and I think being, really up to date on how the issues develop is super important. It was mentioned in the previous panel, some reports that we've put out recently on foundation models and AI, and I think sometimes it can be overlooked just how important it is for an authority like the CMA just to put that kind of information into the public domain, both for its own benefit and also for the benefit of people all the way around the ecosystem. So I think we'll try to do more of that in addition to exercising the new powers when, as Verity says, they should come online in January of next year.
So we've got, I think you've set this up very nicely, Matthew, because we've got kind of in our antitrust bubble, digital platform regulation world, we do have this really kind of interesting natural experiment that is running, looking at the different models. But of course, that occurs in the context of, the much broader context that we heard about on the earlier panel and in the earlier discussions around, the need to build out digital infrastructure, international competitiveness and competitiveness of different economies around the world, which will be so dependent on having access to access to essentially compute capacity and everything that you need to do that. And so in the last few weeks, obviously there's a new government in the US, or soon to be a new government in the US. We have a relatively new government here, and in the last few weeks, the Prime Minister has made a lot of statements around growth and around making sure regulators don't get in the way of growth. And then if you think about the EU side of things, the new Commission very focused on energy, climate change, but also in the context of, some of you may have heard of the Draghi report, which is a report that's come out talking about the competitiveness of Europe and talking about European industrial strategy and how these different areas of regulation might intersect with that, and how we might need, in some cases, very, very aggressive enforcement, but in other cases, a bit more flexibility to ensure that, on a broader stage, Europe has its own champions, Europe is competitive, and similarly here in the UK, ensure that we have the right digital infrastructure here in the UK. Ollie, you mentioned that, increasingly for you're seeing the intersection of a number of different areas of regulation. How does Google see the kind of your slice of regulation that you own in that broader context, in that thinking about the competitiveness of different economies and what we need for the digital future?
So it's a big question. It's certainly true that as we you sort of feel a pull in different directions. On the one hand, there is the pull which is sort of driven by the markets in which we operate, and which is manifest from what you're seeing being launched and the speed at which you're seeing it launched, which led to be out there bringing new products to market. I mean, it's you made the point in your opening remarks, Verity, about the risks of codifying some of these services and looking to a sort of a world before to define the regulation thereafter. And certainly in search, I can tell you here today that I've never seen the degree of competition that our search teams feel at the moment as intense as white heat as it currently is. You look across different types of search queries, different places in which ChatGPT, Perplexity, these engines are a real threat to Google and its search business. So I think you feel that, and from a competition law perspective, it's fantastic, of course, to see that and be able to talk about that. But you very much see that pull to launch and to be out there. At the same time, you sort of feel this call to be part of a drive to ensure competitiveness, both the firm level in the products that we bring to market, at the national level in the ways in which we compete within one market, and then at the supranational level if you're competing in the European Union. So a real exhortation to ensure that you're pushing forward, you're bringing those products to market, you're doing everything you can to build out the platforms. Lots of these rules. As Matthew says, their starting point is that these are big, important platforms, but at the same time, you want the big, important platforms to continue to expand, to innovate, because by their very nature, they're a platform for other people to compete also. So there's really that pull to do everything we've been doing before, but much faster, whether it's the call to competitiveness, whether it's the call of our sort of the business environment to bring products to market. But as I say, at the same time, dealing with the fact that there is an annoying competitional lawyer called Ollie sitting in London saying, look, I've got a report, there's an Article 11 report I've got to deliver to the European Commission, and I have to explain how we have complied with these codes, with these definitions, and that's something that you're going to have to spend this amount of your week working on. And for those of you who are working with engineers, right, that their time, the working week is very much segmented into 30-minute blocks of coding time, and I need that time to now talk to a regulator and explain how this particular product complies with a law that may well have been drafted based on sort of 3 or 4 iterations previous of what you're currently working on. So there is that very much that tension as we try and think about the various demands of the market and of regulation. At the same time, I do think that people are sort of using their imagination for how some of these processes have the potential to actually sort of incorporate themselves within launch calendars, within the product design process. And therein, I think, lies the opportunity. As Matthew says, you know, if within an agency there are people who speak the same language as our engineers, who are cognizant of, you know, the drag that it is to have to come and talk about this stuff, who can very quickly get to the nub of an issue without requiring hours and hours of education, can speak in a language that the engineer understands when talking about solutioning and the options for bringing yourself quickly into compliance so that you can keep moving. I think there are opportunities for that, and I think that really is for me and my team, that's where we're really trying to shift the nature of the regulatory debates within the company and externally, away from an environment where engineers feel like they have to sort of come away and do some homework with us that seems rather irrelevant to their day-to-day, to actually seeing it as an opportunity to get a bit of a sense check from people who also understand the products and the environment in which we're operating, and are really selling not the gold star of well done, you're in compliance, but the gold star of you have listened to this market, you have listened to someone informed, someone technical, someone who understands what you're trying to achieve, and you're more competitive for it. So I think that's the sort of the goal that we shoot for.
Matthew?
Yeah, look, I think it is a challenge. I think it's a challenge on both sides. I think regulators and agencies need to start a bit humble, you know, and need to make sure that we kind of come back to that and recognize that. Probably also really focus on the biggest issues. You know, this can get to be a bit of a laundry list, and some of the challenges I think are going to be trying to really be quite firm on that, actually, because you know, there will be a lot of concerns that get raised. Some of them are super important. Many of them will be super important to the people raising them, but that's not really the test that we're applying. The question is, are they super important to the process of competition itself? So, you know, I think we're going to have to be strong in some ways. As long as we're being criticized from all sides, we're probably about right. That's kind of the regulator's goal. And we'll see how that goes. And, you know, and again, I think we'll have to, you know, adapt as we go along, and as we see, you know, the results coming out, as I said, from this kind of natural experiment, I think, you know, we'll have to be willing to change course. That's what companies in this space do all the time. So definitely want to see large platforms continue to innovate, but equally also want to make sure that we're creating the space for smaller players also to innovate, if you like. You know, this should be a dynamic, competitive process. I think there are some commentators who have said that, you know, it's not been as dynamic in the last 10 or 15 years as it was in 10 or 15 years prior to that. And I think that's what we're really, you know, that's the gold star. Greater dynamism in these areas.
I mean, I could go on with more questions for a long time, but I did promise time for questions from the floor. So are there any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Thank you. I want to apologize.
Oh, I think there's a microphone coming for you.
I want to apologise to Mr. Google before I ask the question, but it is fundamental to the argument, I think, is that Google's business model has been search engine optimization, which is advertising fundamentally, whereas your competitors are looking at it a pay-to-use or pay-to-search environment. Do you think a company like Google, and you probably won't want to answer this question, can change its business model to meet the needs of the market today?
Can I suggest we take this question as well, just while answer that, but hear them both together in case there's overlap.
Thank you very much. My question is rather for Matthew. It's about adjacent markets and the AI impact to markets which are not the core digital market, but others. I have two examples from the US, both of them. The 6-month strike in Hollywood, which was motivated by AI concerns of the writers and actors. No movie produced. So there was a freeze in Hollywood. It was caused by concerns on AI use forms. And the second one, still in the US, is the Ohio Power versus large suppliers of digital and AI. You probably know about this lawsuit, which is basically about the concern that with a market power allowing them to buy a lot of electricity, they might disturb the pricing strategy for retail consumers and have the bills of the poor consumers go very high up because people can't face and compete with large companies when it comes to buying electricity in some context.
Those are two quite separate questions. Ollie,
I'm
do you
happy
want to go first?
to take the first. I think it's a very interesting question, thank you. So you're quite right, of course, that for the search business, search advertising has absolutely been the form of monetization. Around that, in the portfolio of Alphabet products, of course, so we take different approaches to monetization. You have revenue shares in Play, you have subscription models in YouTube. So there are a variety of different ways of thinking of monetizing products. And as we consider how we can compete in the new forms of sort of agentive search, if you want to call it that, then I think there has to be an open-mindedness to how you would monetize. I will say this, I think that one of the things that was quite remarkable to me when I started at Google was that it was always very hard, if not impossible, to get the ads team and the search team to be in the same conversation. Because the way that Google thought about it then and continues to think about it now is that the search team needs to ensure that we have attention through relevant search results. When you've done that, enter ads in the case of search. So I think that core proposition of starting with the product that's going to attract attention because it provides a relevant output, whether that's an agentive response, whether it's booking a hotel for me or whatever it happens to be, will be something that you will see in common with the new areas that we're moving into. This is very much a personal perspective. I can't speak to sort of the monetization plans for Google in generative AI in the round, but it is quite interesting to me as you see something of a form of competition in the monetization models that various are approaching. Subscription models with ChatGPT, Gemini has an advanced subscription model now, and quite how things evolve will be really interesting to observe. One final thought on this is that in a multimodal world, it has always struck me as a very interesting problem to think of, where you've been very used to sort of show an ad at this point and a click generates revenue. How do you start to think about monetization models in that new environment is very much an open question. But thank you for that, I appreciate it.
If I could just follow up on that one, I would say, we would like to see a diversity of business models. So, I don't think it's everybody switching from one to another, but actually if that could well be one of the sort of KPIs that you sort of look for, if you like, right? To this gentleman's question, the digital markets regime is a sectoral regime. So we are thinking kind of vertically rather than horizontally across the entire economy, like antitrust does. So therefore, whilst there are provisions in the Act to allow us to set rules in relation to sectors where the company doesn't have market power, if they're doing things in a way to reinforce their market power, we can do that. However, the kinds of examples that you've given, I think, are, to be honest, a long way from the sorts of things that we're thinking about. I mean, that's quite a stretch. out into thinking about actors or writers in Hollywood writing rooms, that sort of thing. It's much more likely that they're going to be adjacent digital markets, and you're thinking about, if you like, these newer areas that might have some link into the digital activity in the first place. So I think certainly that's where our focus is going to be.
All right. Oh, I can see we've just hit zero seconds remaining. So I think that is a good point to wrap up and let people have coffee. Thank you very much, Matthew, Ollie. Thank you for the questions and for listening.
We've got one more Slido question for you guys. So pull out your mobile phones and answer this last question. What is your favorite platform? Think, marketplaces, social media, social commerce, super apps, other kinds of platforms. Amazon, that's my first company. That's my last company I worked for. Google, Airbnb, TechWolf, Netflix. Come on, guys, let's get more creative. I don't want Amazon to rule the world completely. It's great that they call Revolut a platform. That shows you the convergence of financial services and platforms today. Booking.com, LinkedIn, Google Maps. Perplexity, Apple, Etsy. Laura, where's your old company? I don't see eBay yet. Nope. There we go, finally. I've never seen this one. Too good to go? Too good to go. Too good to go? Awesome. Someone in the room that, yeah?
They're great.
Are they great? Too good to go? Is that you? The founder? Oh, there we go. Android. Excellent. Well, you can keep doing that while I tell you a little bit about our next speaker. So our next speaker is the co-founder and COO of Launchworks. She has been spending 20 years of her career, Billy working with companies to help them to launch, design, scale platform businesses. She spent quite a bit of time with, she was a senior exec at eBay, and she's been one of 8 experts advising the World Economic Forum. Oh, sorry, there we go. Thank you. They're good at taking care of me. Working at the World Economic Forum, and she's also the co-author of Platform Strategy and Mission BlaBlaCar. So please welcome Laura Claire Reillier.
So I'm delighted to welcome Ruth Cousins. So Ruth, you're the co-founder and CEO of This Labs, who originated from Cambridge University. And I'm also delighted to welcome Mathilde Jasinski. You're the Chief Medical Officer of MediSimple. You're a doctor and also an osteopath, so it's quite a rare combination. And I'm also very happy to welcome Charles Armitage. You're the co-founder and CEO of Florence. You're also a doctor, right? And you've raised over $35 million over the last few years. So welcome. So today we're going to talk about healthcare. So there's a big gap today between people's expectations and what healthcare systems have to offer. And there's a number of reasons, obviously, demographics, but also because people are now today used to choice, convenience, and speed for all sorts of services. On-demand shopping, booking a taxi, booking a holiday, and of course the platform economy has something to do with that. But when we look at demographics, obviously, the populations in developed countries are getting older. And so, the more resources you add, the more resources you need. And in fact, when you look at the NHS, there's already 1.5 million people who are employed by the NHS. And that's an increase of 30% since 2009. So, they've increased the numbers a lot. But there's still a shortage of staff, isn't it? So as a result, we end up with really huge healthcare systems. They often are run in a linear way. They often are run in silos, fragmented, with lots of inefficiencies and complexities. So really, our healthcare systems are on a cliff edge. The question we're going to discuss today is how digital platforms and AI can help solve the healthcare crisis. So I'm first going to ask you to describe your platform, perhaps starting with you, Mathilde.
Yes. Hi, thanks for having me. MeditSimple's a platform that we've developed to optimize patient pathways. So the idea is that the patient will go on the platform, input their symptoms in a few words, be prompted with medical history and medications, and we'll guide them to the next best step of care. The idea is to empower the patient to make sustainable and understood and informed decisions about their care. And the ultimate goal is to optimize a resource allocation, essentially, and reduce waste in healthcare.
Ruth?
I'm the co-founder and CEO of This Labs, which runs the Discovery platform, and we exist to really help the problem of adoption of innovation and improvement in healthcare systems, and particularly from the perspective that the best products and services often fail in healthcare because they don't take the needs of patients and staff and the public into account. And so products are developed that simply don't land because they don't understand the system that they're landing into, they don't understand the real life needs of patients. And so what we do is we run an online platform which is essentially using qualitative research methods in order to gather insight from patients and staff at scale. So this work is often done in very small groups in a face-to-face way, but we allow it to happen at scale using our platform. Our clients can be anybody from very small new startups who are looking to design new products to people like NHS England, who are the kind of main structural funding organisation for the NHS, who are looking to design new approaches to delivering health, new pathways, for example. And we have about 11,000 people registered on the platform. Currently, we recruit new people all the time. We've used a very good example of the way that we've used the platform was in partnership with colleagues at the University of Cambridge, where, as Laura said, a University of Cambridge spin out, and the Royal Colleges of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and Midwives to design new tools and training for monitoring labour. So over 1,500 people, including people from the different professions, but also people who've given birth in the last 5 years, birth partners and others, were involved in developing those new tools, which are now currently being piloted in 9 sites across the UK. So that's the kind of work we do.
Charles.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me here. So my name's Charles, I run a company called Florence, and what we do is we help healthcare organisations build a flexible workforce. Previous life I was a doctor, and about 7 years ago saw some of the challenges around the healthcare workforce, which I think is probably one of the most existential issues we have to deal with in our society, is how we build a workforce to support this impending demographic tide that we've got coming. Saw some of the challenges, decided to build a platform to solve that, and actually ended up reading Benoit and Laura's book about 7 years ago, and was a bit of a kickstart for me to start Florence. So if you haven't read that, I'd recommend it. I think I'm getting commission, am I? Or and
if you want to get rich, don't write books.
Yeah, so yeah.
I'll tell you that.
Yeah, don't start a company called Florence either. But yeah, so essentially we help healthcare organisations build a flexible workforce and help them support some of their supply challenges they have around their different types of flexible workforce pools that they use. We're mainly in the UK. We've recently launched in France and Canada, and it's all going great. So really appreciate being here.
Thank you. So I first want to ask you, how's your platform model as a business model key to your development? Perhaps Mathilde, you want to start first?
I think Medit Simple's platform is key to the development, definitely. I think there's different elements to it. We've got a big scalability from the very much patient-centered kind of element, and that drives network kind of effects and increases growth quite naturally. We've got diversified revenue streams which help as well, and with the way the platform's been designed is very much with a kind of view to internationalizing it. So I think, yes, it's been designed to be able to be spanned out, essentially.
Yeah, so I think it's really critical to what we do, and just to re-emphasize what Charles said, it was reading Platform Lean book that really actually made me realize that what I was doing was running a platform, in fact. So attracting participants to take part in these kinds of insight gathering projects and matching them with the right clients is fundamentally a platform job, essentially. And what it enables us to do is do the work that we do at very large scale. It gives people, so the platform gives people a place to put the huge amount of goodwill that people have towards health systems and also towards other people in the community. So building, trust around, if I contribute to this project and I give my experience, my expertise, whether it's professional expertise or lived expertise of a health condition, then I am building a new, better, more innovative, exciting way of delivering healthcare services. And we always focus the work we do on a really concrete problem. So we're not asking people to sort of throw ideas into the air. We're focusing them on actually developing and designing specific things. And the platform enables us to do that at scale in a way that wouldn't be possible in any other way. But it also builds those lovely network effects of trust between the participants and the people running the projects as well.
I think for me, and maybe this will get a bit granular on workforce deployment, but when you're thinking about how you deploy a healthcare workforce, which is what we do, there are three kind of core jobs that need to be done within a technology. And the technology provides value, but really the value is in the supply and the demand on either side of the marketplace. But ultimately what our technology allows that supply and demand to do is do three things. One is build trust through things like credentialing and onboarding to make sure you're getting the person who is doing the work is qualified to do the work and safe to do so. Two is to match supply and demand and make sure that when you've got the demand for a intensive care nurse of a certain level in this postcode area, that it finds the right person to fulfill that role. And then third, you've got to employ and pay and bill the right people. And so ultimately, I think those are the three core building blocks of what we do in that workflow. And yes, the technology enables that to happen in a really seamless, user-centric way. But nothing would transact without the supply and the demand on either side, and that's why we spend a lot of our time thinking.
So how do you think about the customer experience on all sides? And I know that for some of you there are two sides, and perhaps for others there are multiple sides, right? So that can be a challenge because obviously you have to think about the different customer types at the same time.
How do you make an experience that sort of balances the requirements to both sides?
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you
it's always a challenge, right? And I think the way we deal with that is just through transparency, right? So, I'll give you a really granular example, right? If you are a hospital organisation that books a nurse to do a shift and the nurse doesn't turn up, the nurse wants to have the flexibility to not do that if something happens in their life. Well, for the hospital, that's a really very negative event for them. And we've had a lot of back and forward on how we manage rules of engagement within the platform. And I guess ultimately what we've landed on is we've created a very clear set of criteria for behavior on both sides of the platform. And then rather than trying to discipline people either side of the marketplace ourselves based on that, we present that as transparently as possible to the other side of the marketplace, to both sides of the marketplace. So whether you're an organisation that uses Florence on the demand side or a healthcare worker on the supply side, a key part of your profile is your performance metrics around reliability, quality, responsiveness, all these kind of things that are important, and actually people really buy into that. And it means that as a platform, it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle of quality, because high quality employers and high quality professionals end up getting more and more opportunities, stick around for longer, drive lifetime value, whereas like lower quality employers or workforce tend to drop off the bottom and leave the marketplace. So like generally that quality score, which we see, we do regular NPSs and CSATs across all of our customer base, and we just see that going up and up and up as the marketplace manages itself.
What about you, Ruth?
Yeah, so on the kind of client side of the platform, we as a team mediate a lot of that experience. And so we're aiming as we grow and improve our technology to allow more access to that for the clients. But at the moment, the customer experience is very much on the participant side of the platform. And so really that is about providing the easiest, most accessible, most engaging, most straightforward way of participating in projects, which is kind of difficult because what we're also trying to do is slightly more nuanced techniques of gathering insight. So not just simply a survey, although we absolutely run surveys, but actually we engage people in things like consensus building processes, which actually take multiple rounds of participation. And so we do come in with the fair wind of this, huge amount of kind of goodwill and enthusiasm that people have for participating in these projects. But as you will know, if you run a platform, as the first minute they reach a blocker, they go, oh, I'm leaving this and I'll come back in 5 minutes, and I never come back in 5 minutes. So the ease of getting somebody through that process is absolutely critical. And of course, we do lots of user research on that. And I would say that a kind of critical issue of it is balancing the needs of a good, rigorous, useful piece of research or insight gathering with the ease of getting somebody through that process. Because let's face it, we're talking about the most time-strapped people in the country, if we're talking about NHS staff, or we're talking about people who inherently have, much going on in their lives in terms of potentially dealing with multiple conditions or, caring for people with multiple conditions. So that's our kind of real focus, is just the streamlining of that experience to get that insight in as efficient way as possible. And sometimes people do say that participating in our projects is fun, but we feel that's a bit of a high bar to set ourselves for every project.
So Mathilde, in terms of the customer experience, you mentioned, I picked up on the word efficiency and sustainability. So how do you, could you elaborate?
So I think our platform's designed like a marketplace, and we essentially have onboarded all of the actors of the healthcare ecosystem. So we have a lot of different types of clients. We have patients on one side, we have professionals on the other, we have payers, so insurance companies, and one could imagine as we develop maybe even government-run agencies and things like that. We also have pharmacies and labs and imaging departments. So we have really a lot of different people. So what we've spent a long time doing when we were setting up was actually making sure that there was a very clear value proposition for every different actor, and that value proposition is very different. So for example, for patients, we're very clear. Obviously we're transparent throughout everything, and I think that, as you were saying very rightly, Charles, builds trust. But I think for patients, we make sure that their pathway is streamlined, that they have an experience that really guides them, and they feel supported throughout their journey. So there is no loss in there. I think patients often come to the platform because they're lost in the system. What we don't want them to do is to get lost on the platform. So there's this need for very, very fluid, efficient process for patients, and there's a lot of patient feedback coming in. It's excellent. And we spend a lot of time working with patients to make that more fluid. With regards to professionals, we improve their experience by making sure that there's very clear kind of expectations. They want to be more visible. They want to be more understood by patients. They want the right people coming to them, because they know that if they get the wrong patients, they get very bad feedback, because it's just not what people are expecting. So it's matching the right person with the right patient. And the same thing goes for all of the other actors, really. We've introduced introduced payers recently. That's the last step of our expansion. For payers, it's a slightly different concept. They're coming in because they're interested in obviously saving money. We're in a resource poor environment, but they want to save money without compromising on care and without compromising on quality for their clients. So again, it's making sure that we've got the right expectations and we're building towards them. So it's been a step-by-step process, and it's been a little bit here, a little bit there, and we've kind of worked around the ecosystem. But yes, I think that in a nutshell.
Great. So let's move to scaling, because obviously scaling is critical to have massive impact as a platform. So what strategies have you found effective when scaling your platform? Perhaps I'll start with you, Charles.
Sure. I think that's a broad question. One of the things, so in the last 18 months, we've launched in a couple of new markets. We've taken it from the UK to France and Canada. And I think there have been a number of learnings from that. Number one is how lucky we are to have an amazing technology team that's built a very flexible platform. So I can imagine that would be a problem for a lot of people, but those core building blocks that I talked about, onboarding, credentialing, brackets, trust, matching supply and demand, paying and billing, we've managed to build very flexibly across different markets and can kind of drag and drop solutions into each place. So that's good because there are differences between each market. The challenge that we find, I guess, is that whilst network effects are extremely powerful within an individual market, so within the UK we have a flywheel going where we don't really have to spend anything on acquisition on the supply side of the marketplace, it all comes organically. As soon as you enter a new market like us, you get very hyper-local, it's all hyper-local, so there are no network effects and we've had to start from scratch again. So relearning some of those acquisition funnels from like our early days in the UK have been maybe a little bit more challenging than we thought. But I guess we have got a bit of a playbook about how to do that properly.
Do you send a local team over there, or do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a central UK team that manages things like technology, finance, people, marketing, all those kind of things. But then we definitely have a very local, extremely local go-to-market team.
What about you, Ruth?
Yeah, I think we're in a similar position in terms of technology in that we're very lucky to have very robust technology that has the capacity to take on a lot more than we're demanding of it at the moment. We're very early days, so we're only 18 months old as an organisation, so I'd say we're right in the throes of working out how to make scaling work. And it's very chicken and egg because, the more participants we have registered on the platform, the more attractive it is to clients, but in order to register participants on the platform, we have to have projects that clients have brought to us to want to do. So we've been trying to intervene in that kind of chicken and egg issue by really targeting and developing projects that are explicitly designed to demonstrate the value of the platform, but also to be very broad-based and things that lots of people can participate in. So if you go onto our platform at the moment, you will see some of the projects up there around dementia diagnosis, which is sadly something that many people have experience of. They're around attitudes to cancer screening. So we're doing a really interesting discrete choice experiment, which is quite an involved process around attitudes to cancer screening, which many people have opinions on. So I guess what we're trying to do is take kind of really deliberate steps to intervene in that scaling process with projects that we think are really attractive, both to clients and to participants, in order to get the flywheel going, because we're definitely still in the phase of kind of the heavy bit of the flywheel, I would say.
I think scaling, again, similarly, I think we're very lucky the platform has been built for scaling, so we don't have the technological stumbling block. That's very helpful. We're currently in the process of scaling mostly in the UK, although international scaling is planned in the near future. But I think our scaling strategy has been, as I said, we talked about network effects, and I think there is definitely a network effect with regards of patient-centered. So the patients are talking, practitioners are using it, and so there is this natural kind of growth. We found the best scaling strategy for us was actually accessing payers, because payers are insurance companies, and particularly international insurance companies. They come with their own clients, they come with their own professionals as well, and so the onboarding is a lot easier for everybody involved when there's kind of one communal actor involved. And same thing goes for international scaling. So I think the plan for the international scaling is to start off in the international companies, so that we'd already have kind of targeted areas that we know we're going into, and then essentially building up from there. So yes, it's definitely dependent on good technology base, which we're very lucky to have.
Great. So I want to move to the question of AI now. So of course, AI means lots of things, lots of types of AI. There's generative AI, there's machine learning, but how have you found AI useful in your business, being, matching customers, or matching both different sides, being interpreting results, being advising clients? What's been your experience so far? Mathilde?
So AI has been built in from the beginning for us, although it has obviously evolved, as AI has been evolving tremendously anyway. So initially we were using it mostly to match the right practitioner with the right patient. And as it's evolved now with our latest edition, our AI part, which has come in, and that one is guiding patients. So essentially it is listening to the patient's language, it's responding to the patient, and it's so essentially helping us to understand the patient better, guide the patient, and then essentially match them with the right person. So it's going through the whole thing, but we're using it in every element.
I think for us, the key use of AI is in analysing free text responses. So when you ask people to give you their insights and opinion, you get lots and lots of free text. And it's often a big thing that puts people off doing that sort of work is, oh gosh, I'm going to end up with 20,000 words worth of text that I'm going to have to analyse. And of course, AI can resolve that problem. Now, my academic colleagues would be very quick to say, to a certain standard and at a certain level. But if, like us, what you're aiming to do is make a quick, high level, but useful intervention in an immediate problem, then it can actually be really useful for that. So that's the kind of core area that we use it for. The other thing that we do use it for is transcription as well, because we're increasingly moving to people recording responses, audio responses or video responses, and so it's just another step in speeding up that process again.
I'm not convinced we've really found a really strong use case for nailing productivity improvements through, what everyone thinks of AI is now, which is essentially large language models, like last couple of years. Maybe we've made customer service a bit better and more efficient. Maybe the engineers are a bit more efficient with their co-pilots or whatever. And yes, there are some platform features that help customers more. I can't think of anything that I can really put a pin in though and go, we've had to hire fewer people, or this person is like 10x more productive because of how we've enabled that through AI. I think where I do see some changes though is how we use it internally to power our team and help them do more. And I had a really good, but that's a learning thing, and people need to be really curious about that. So one that I heard it on a podcast a few weeks ago, something we did a couple of weeks ago that was great, is we made, whenever anyone opens their browser, it opens on ChatGPT, so that's their default search experience. And from a personal level, it's been transformative about me thinking, this problem I've got in front of me, how can I use a large language model to solve it? And as soon as you start thinking like that and start iterating and it's practice, right? As soon as you start practicing with large language models, you become a lot more, you realise the world of possibilities. So for me, I think the biggest moves internally in terms of our progress is when our internal team are trained and understand how they can use it to enhance their work.
So AI can also be quite useful in decision making in healthcare, but there are limitations in terms of what are the ethical limit. So I was wondering whether that is a challenge for you or a concern, and what steps have you taken in that area?
So one of the crucial points for us in developing our product and knowingly wanting to use AI was that it was extremely important to us all that it was used responsibly. So one of the first things I did when I came on board with Laurence and the rest of the team was actually set up an ethics committee. And we consciously kind of went and investigated what other people are doing and big platforms and things like that. And actually we found a hybrid model was the one that we wanted to go for. So it was very important that we had external kind of view into our systems. And I think making sure that what we're doing not only fits in with expectations from all walks of life, but also is essentially safe for everybody to use. As with any new product, I think AI comes with great kind of alert buttons, and I think that certainly as a medic, but as a patient as well, I'd want to know that things are being used responsibly. So for us, the ethics committee has been a nice kind of sounding block. We've been contacting them, and we've had one big meeting. We've got another one coming up in the new year, making sure that we're discussing the challenges, we're discussing the concerns, and we're keeping a transparent kind of tab. So the idea really is to plan developments, develop and use the product in a way that is acceptable to all on the panel.
I'd maybe just take a slightly different angle on that question, because some of the work that we're now doing is starting to understand the acceptability of AI in these contexts to patients and to staff and to wide groups of people. And I think what's really important in that is to understand what the counterpoint is. So decisions are already being made in ways that are perhaps not entirely logical and rational, and we would like to think that that's how healthcare is delivered, but we also probably in our hearts know the reality that there are a whole range of different motivations that go into making decisions, like risk stratification, right? So if you're deciding who's going to be the next patient at the top of the list because they're the riskiest, there are different ways of making that decision. And so I think a lot of the things that we're thinking about in the projects that we're running are around how do we make a realistic range of trade-offs that people can kind of articulate their preferences around, right? So it's not either everything is rosy or the robots do it. Like those two, that's not a nuanced conversation. So we're trying to promote in the work that we do a nuanced conversation around that.
Yeah, I think the conversation about AI in healthcare is very similar to fully self-driving cars. So, fully self-driving cars are, of many order of a magnitude safer than a human behind the wheel, which is a very dangerous thing. They're very dangerous things to do, relative. But how many orders of magnitude does it need to be better before it's something that everyone's comfortable with? Like 100, 1,000, 10,000, a million times safer than a human driver before people are comfortable getting in a fully self-driving car? I think it's a very similar debate in healthcare, and people are very nervous about, black boxes, human out of the loop thinking within healthcare. The reality is that healthcare is really dangerous and is in many ways provided in a very unsafe way today. So whether that's understaffing, people being tired, systems being crap, ceilings falling down, whatever, there's certainly within the UK, the safety bar in healthcare is dramatically low. And I think one of the core drivers around that is resources, and we don't have the resources or the workforce to provide really high quality safe healthcare at scale. And I think if we're slow and resistant to use AI to try and augment that workforce, there will be much worse patient outcomes than if we are brave about it. But it does obviously require a good comms strategy, because it could go pretty wrong.
So what kind of collaboration between companies like you, digital platforms, but also government bodies and other stakeholders, what kind of conversation should take place so that we improve the current system that we've got today?
I mean, I think for me, and I apologies if there is anyone from the government or NHS here, but it's as a private provider trying to innovate within the government healthcare sector in the UK, it's extraordinarily difficult. the anti-commerciality that exists within the public healthcare system is crazy. The lack of decision-making capabilities and the ability for people to take risk is like very, very poor. My job and our job as a team is to try and help push that innovation and tell that story. But I do think the way the system is set up at the moment is like a huge barrier to some of the progress that I think we need to make if we are going to keep healthcare free at the point of access and high quality and safe for like the next 10, 20, 30 years.
I think the problem is a total lack of nuance in the conversation. So healthcare is massively complicated and massively human as well. Like we've already mentioned that the NHS is, I think, the 7th largest employer globally. Like it's absolutely enormous, and every one of us is either a patient or a potential patient. And the trade-offs that are made day in, day out are enormously complex, and yet the only conversation that we have at a citizen level is, do we want the NHS to be free at the point of access while everybody does? Like that's not even a conversation. So we spin ourselves into loops arguing about, who's trying to privatise the NHS. But I think actually, and maybe I would say this, wouldn't I, but digital platforms and platforms like Discovery enable people to actually have a much more nuanced conversation about much more directly, kind of active questions. So how should we be monitoring labour, right? That lots of people have a legitimate perspective on those things. What attitude should we take towards cancer screening? Should we not do screening if it throws up lots of false positives? And if you look at countries like Taiwan, they are looking at loads of really interesting ways that you can use digital methods to intervene in democracy and allow the citizenship to have a much more involved conversation with their government, rather than we're going to vote for you this time and 5 years later we'll vote for the other guy, and in the meantime we'll row about who's privatising what. So I'm actually very optimistic that the kind of conversation is progressing in a really productive way towards much more kind of participation in a much less polarized and much less idealism driven fashion, if that makes sense.
I think that that's one of my passions, actually, public health, particularly the NHS, because I am a big fan of it, actually, or when it works. But I think that for me, the issue is that the NHS is fractionated. Nobody really knows who makes decisions within it. And I think that because nobody really knows who makes decisions with it, most decisions that are made politically. They're not made really, unfortunately, in for the greater good. And I think that what is coming out of certainly our platform currently, it would be such an ideal tool for a government, because you can have transparency. Currently hospitals, NHS hospitals that want to outsource anything have no way of picking their provider. So they will pick the provider that is the provider they've been matched with. That provider can have any cost they want because there is no competitivity there. That is not right. There is so much that can be done, but it has to be treated as it is, what it is, a marketplace with public funding that is funding it. And I think that until we accept that healthcare is essentially something that costs us money and that should cost us money, we all need to be treated, there will be a problem. And I think this refusal to discuss finances and healthcare at the same time means that it remains fractionated and that it remains an extremely expensive system where the money isn't spent where it needs to be spent. So I think it needs to be a conversation. I am also very hopeful. I think that the governments are making more and more noise towards actually wanting to innovate and listen to the ideas out there. There are so many products that would be beneficial currently, and I think I'm very hopeful that they will start to listen to us all.
I was just going to add, so the UK government at the beginning of last week has launched a consultation called Change NHS. And immediately the news stories were about the British public does have a wonderful sense of humour, and immediately people were suggesting, catapulting dear old Wes Streeting, out of a water cannon or whatever it was, or beer taps in every hospital ward. But I don't think we should write, I mean, it's easy to write it off, yeah, and laugh at it, but I don't think we should write it off quite so easily, because actually, if you go through the comments, people are making really super sensible comments about like things that could actually change for the better. And so, you know, as I say, like I worry that people will kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, it's all silliness, or it's all, you know, it's all comedy, because I don't think, you know, it's the first time in my memory anyway that any government has really explicitly said, before we develop this next 10-year plan, we want to hear from people. We want to understand what you think. We want to understand that. Now, of course, they've got to follow through on that, and that is a whole different ballgame. But, you know, just a slight plea maybe not to kind of write it off too quickly.
So if there was one thing that you could change to make healthcare and healthcare systems more human and more sustainable, what would it be?
I'd put everybody on our platform.
That's cheating, you can't say that. I mean, I think from my perspective, it's to really be mindful of that adoption gap, right? We'd all like to think that we all as humans behave entirely rationally and take our pills as the doctor tells us to, and do the exercises the physio prescribes and all of those kinds of things. But actually, you know, we don't. We do the thing that's most convenient for us. You know, there may be barriers to me doing something that are just not transparent to somebody else doing something. And so, you know, to really understand adoption and to really make adoption happen, and this shift about moving towards digital, which is such an emphasis in the UK at the moment, you know, you really have to have compassion and understand how that lands with people across the system. And so, and that's how you get adoption, and that's how you get scaling of technology across the system. You have to understand the people.
It's a slightly contrarian view, but I think everyone hates healthcare managers, but I think we need to have much more of them, much higher quality, and therefore pay healthcare managers a lot more, so you can ultimately improve productivity.
Okay, great. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Are there any questions here in the audience, in person or online? Yes, there is one question over there.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for an amazing panel just now. A quick question, I guess, again about like this communication between the NHS and the private side of things, the business side. Is there a dialogue being fostered right now? Or to add to the question that was asked before, are you incentivized in any way from the NHS side? I just heard you, like the communication is broken, but are you incentivized monetarily or somehow else to be dealing with the issues that the NHS is faced with?
I think I can take the first bit on, you know, incentivization for improved communication between the public sector and the private sector. I think there is increasing privatization within services in the NHS, which is, I think, a very, very good thing. It's a completely separate question to what I think most people believe in, which is a publicly funded system that's free at the point of access. The problem is that this conversation about privatizing the healthcare system is like a huge political, you know, red mark. And that means that it all goes on very quietly behind closed doors, and you read Daily Mail headlines about how many knee operations have been outsourced to Spire or Nuffield. And I think that's a really bad thing to talk about. We should be talking about patient outcomes and quality scores, not whether it was done in this hospital, which is publicly run, or this hospital is privately run. I don't care. I just want to have good outcomes. So there is increasing privatization and conversations going on about that. Great. There should be more, and it should be much more open and supported.
Well, there's one final question, and I think then we have to stop. Oh, maybe Kapul? Alan? Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, we're all doing so well. I'm about to turn the apple cart upside down. Given that we were talking about AI, is it not time where we as individuals own our own data? And if we own our own data and have the ability to then reach out to best practice, doesn't that fundamentally change the way we look at the NHS and other medical problems? The reason I say that is that you are all data companies, but you're trying to fix a model which respectfully is already broken. So rather than fixing a model that's broken, shouldn't we build a model that could actually deliver a personal health resource to every individual across the country?
Actually, I'm happy to take this question. We're not. I suppose we are fixing a problem, but we have built a model that is fully independent. So the idea actually is that we are providing personalized healthcare. And I think that that is the strength of AI. If it's used well again and responsibly, if it is efficient, then what we should be providing is the right answer for the right person at the right time. And I think that that is the strength of having something that is greater than one person, because currently, I think, unfortunately, your care is only as good as the first practitioner you see, and I think that's unfair on many fronts. It introduces huge biases, particularly with specific populations that don't have good access to healthcare, and I think that it is definitely about personalized healthcare. So we are certainly, our platform, building a model that is a new model, that is a model of the right care at the right time for the right person.
But if I can just mention to Charles, you're doing the same thing. You're actually helping people get employed, whether it's by their location, by their expertise. You're matchmaking, dare I call it dating, but you're matchmaking people's competencies with needs. That is, again, a game changer. So I think there is a need for people to listen to bottom-up capability rather than everything being done from the top down.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time. Thank you, Mathilde. Thank you, Ruth. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
For this excellent panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. And now I would like to invite back up Laura and Benoit to give out the prize.
Yes, so we have a prize today. So basically, when we launched Platform Leaders, it was because we realized that different communities that were shaping digital platforms collectively had great insights for one another, but were not always talking to one another. And when they were not always talking the same language to one another. And one of these communities is the academics community, and we keep coming across great research, great papers from various places around the world. And there's a great need on the practitioners' side to get access to these insights. But they're often packaged or communicated in a way that is difficult to consume. So we've been thinking about how we bridge that. And what we thought was that it would be a great idea when we come across a great paper to maybe translate it a little bit and help some of the key insights that are embedded in the paper get communicated to the practitioners community. So we've done just that. It's the first time. So
it is the first time.
We've got an inaugural prize or award, and Laura is going to announce who's
Yes,
getting
maybe you can also move the clicker.
it.
So the winners of the award are Joe Plug and Joost Ristfeld. So Joe is assistant professor at IU Business School, and Joost is associate professor at UCL School of Management. And Joe is going to come later to talk about his paper, but we're now going to show you the animated video that was produced by Launchworks and Co. To democratize their paper.
So just to come back, a little story. We wrote this book, Platform Strategy, you may have heard about it, and we also did a little cartoon about the book. And when we realized how successful the cartoon was, we realized it was very important to present complex things in a simple way. So that's the idea behind this short video on the winning paper.
Imagine building the next big platform. You're excited because you know network effects can create immense value that scales with the number of users. But before launching, take a look at Rolling the Dice by Dr. Joe Plug and Dr. Joost Rietveld, which highlights important considerations when designing products with network effects. Network effects drive growth, but only if they reach a critical mass of users. Network products with large user bases can win, yet those that fail to reach this scale are often locked out of the market entirely. This risk is especially highest in the early stages. Analyzing the board game industry, the authors reveal that if your product has social features, like multiplayer or friend-sharing functions, You may need to work harder to convince users to buy and invest time in it. Novel product features can overwhelm consumers, and early adopters don't always predict mass appeal. In crowded markets, network products can be overshadowed by competitors, making it difficult to build a critical mass. The takeaway? Network effects can be powerful, but are not a guaranteed path to success. As you craft your optimal strategy, you must think carefully about product features, market dynamics, launch timing, and consumer behavior.
There you go. There is the paper with all the formula behind the video for those interested. There is the link, and I think we're going to be talking to
Joe.
Joe.
Joe is now going to talk about his paper in more eloquent terms.
Great to see you. Can you also see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's perfect. So hi everyone, I'm Joe from IE University, and I'm going to present you a very quick take on mine and yours Speedbuild's latest published research, with some nice implications for the platforms community. So the paper is titled "Rolling the Dice: Resolving Demand Uncertainty in Markets with Partial Network Effects." But before I dive into all of this, I want to thank you, Laure and Benoit, for awarding us with the first ever Platforms Leaders Academic Prize, and I think the video abstract is awesome. So thank you for this. So yes, indeed, imagine you're developing a ride-hailing app like Uber or Lyft, and according to a professional blog post on appinventive.com, these are the must-have features for such an app, including geolocation, login, and in-app payment options. However, what about a ride-sharing functionality that essentially enables riders to pool trips with strangers? On top of any platform's indirect network effect, a ride-sharing functionality would additionally unlock direct network effects by making the app more valuable the more end users would actually want to share rides. And this strategic agency by firms to implement direct network effects into their platform or product design leads to a situation in which products with and without network effects compete within the same market. Other examples of markets with what we call now partial network effects include fitness apps, where some only allow for individual time tracking, like WOD here on the left-hand side, while others encourage comparison with friends or local leaderboards, like Adidas Runtastic. And my favorite example comes from the video game industry, where some games like The Witcher are strictly single player, meaning of all the players' interactions, they are happening with the computer-controlled characters, while in other games, for example World of Warcraft, most interactions actually happen with other real players who thereby benefit from a direct network effect. So where do I want to go with all of this? It is well established that a product's value proposition, so this is the value a given consumer derives from using a product, is composed of two parts: standalone value and network value. So standalone value refers to the value a user derives from using a product in isolation, whereas network value refers to the value the same user derives from social interactions with other users. So what does this mean for products competing in a market with partial network effects? So let's consider these two products, a network product A and a standalone product B. While the potential value of A that A can generate for its users is much larger than B, at the time of the product launch, product A's user base is essentially zero, and therefore the network value part is unrealized, making B initially superior to A. So that means consumers face some form of uncertainty over if and how much network value is generated. And therefore, in this research, we actually seek to answer, how does this demand uncertainty impact the adoption of network products compared to standalone products? What strategies can reduce demand uncertainty? And how do these strategies affect the market's success of network versus standalone products? So all of our theorizing follows a very simple intuition, namely that factors that increase a product's underlying demand uncertainty, you could think, for example, of a highly novel product design or releasing your product into a highly competitive market, are particularly bad for network products because they already have this underlying uncertainty. While those factors that alleviate demand uncertainty, for example, facilitating product adoption by early adopters via a crowdfunding campaign, are more beneficial for network than for standalone products. We actually test our hypothesis or theory in the global board games industry, which encompasses all economic activity that falls within the realm of non-digital tabletop games. So some of you might ask yourself why we're using a non-digital setting for something that has actually implications for platforms. Well, we have three good reasons for this. So first, within the board games industry, firms can decide to add network value by launching their games with so-called collectible components. So collectible components come in the form of cards, miniatures, or dice, and add network value to a board game by enabling players to trade said components and engage in competitions. As an example, consider Monopoly. If you own Monopoly and host a local games night at your own place, you really do not want any of your friends to also bring Monopoly, since there are simply no complementarities there. However, if you possess the Magic the Gathering card game and the individual cards for this game, you want all of your friends to also buy Magic cards so that you can compete against them and trade with them to improve your own collection. Then there's a second reason. As a consequence of what I've just said, in the board games industry, products with and without network value compete side by side. And finally, and probably the most elegant of reasons for why we choose a non-digital setting here, is that the decision for firms to implement network value is final, in comparison to how it might be the case in digital settings, where firms can add network value at later points in time by simply changing the product's underlying code, which makes it incredibly difficult for us as researchers to accurately identify effects. So also considering the crowd and the purpose of this award, and for the sake of time, I won't really go much into our data sample and our methodological approach. Instead, I dive straight into the results. So aligned with our expectations, factors that increase a product's underlying demand uncertainty are particularly bad for network products, as shown by the following. So first, an increase in product novelty, which we measure by looking at the gameplay mechanics individual games have, are particularly bad for network products. Second, additionally, games released within a 6-month period surrounding the focal game's release decrease the number of owners for games with collectible components more than those of standalone games. And third, the presence of a hit game that has an extraordinarily large market share shortly after its release that also competes within the same competition window decreases the number of owners for games with collectible components much more than those for standalone games. Finally, we do not find the support for the notion that alleviating demand uncertainty, for example via a crowdfunding campaign, is particularly beneficial for network products. On the contrary, a successful Kickstarter campaign actually decreases the number of owners for games with collectible components by being favorable for standalone games. A potential reason for this very counterintuitive finding is that the idiosyncratic features of a crowdfunding campaign might alienate later adopters, and we talk more about this in the discussion of the paper. So the main takeaways from the paper: in sum, network effects can be heterogeneous and firms have some agency in shaping them. This then leads to a situation in which products with network effects compete against those without in the same market. And in such a situation, one must be mindful of product design, business model, and launch timing. Second, network products face greater demand uncertainty than standalone products. So a product's network value is unknown at the time of the launch and shortly thereafter. And consequently, including social features is not always beneficial, despite the hits narrative in mainstream media. And last but not least, firms can resolve their product's demand uncertainty through various strategies. So we show that product novelty, early adoption, and competition indeed do affect demand uncertainty, and factors that increase underlying demand uncertainty negatively affect the diffusion of network products over and above these factors' effects on the diffusion of standalone products. This is all from my end. I'm happy to take some questions, and thank you again for the award.
Sure. Any question?
Sure.
In the days after this demonstration.
No question from
practitioners? It's been a long session, Joe. So everybody is tired.
No
and you're the
worries.
last one standing between the wine. So maybe
don't want to keep from that.
Nobody is there. Okay. Well, thank you, Joe, for joining us. Sorry for the sound back, and congratulations again. The paper is great. So
thank you, Joe.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Good. That's it. I think we have a few things you need to come back up. So basically, we are helping them promote the paper. And we produced the little animation. So the idea is we welcome them, we bring them into the platform leaders community, and we help them communicate with practitioners. And it may sound trivial, but network effects are super nuanced, super important and strategic. We heard about that in the previous panel. And yet, very few people really think hard and strategically about how you create them and what it means for your business. So great to have these insights.
Great. Well, it's just for me to say, we are now going to have, for those of you who want to take a tour of Digital Catapult, you can go to the back and meet up with maybe Justin or Petra. And also we have drinks in the bar just right outside. So thank you guys for coming. It's been wonderful. Thank you guys for having me. It's been great. And we'll see you guys in the bar.
Thank you, Laura.
Excellent. I will just also thank everybody. I'm not going to run through all the names because I know you want all to go to the bar, but I would like to thank everybody who's been helping us, in particular you, Laura. So thanks a lot.